Around him there were only trees, and when he saw this, the boy understood one thing. He found himself in another world. He looked with interest at the huge white wolf lying nearby. But he was not at all afraid of what had happened. The black-haired boy smiled brightly, lay down, and put his hands on the beast. He was happy, and when the wolf touched him, he felt a pleasant fluffiness. They say when something unexpected happens, the mind becomes foggy. It was in such a fog that the boy found himself. Suspended in space, he looked around the surrounding places with curiosity. The boy really wanted to find out where he was. His name was Tenno Akira. He was 35 years old. Tenno could not understand why he ended up here. The boy frowned and tried to recall his last memories of what he had been doing. That morning Tenno's head was foggy, and he overslept, but as always he still went to work, and after his shift he headed home, holding his phone in his hands. The boy was crossing the pedestrian crossing and reading a message from his sister. She asked him to buy yogurt on the way. Tenno had already bought it and was eager to get home as soon as possible. But all his plans were shattered. The boy did not even notice how a truck was mercilessly rushing towards him. So Tenno did not manage to avoid the collision and crashed into it, and he remembered how the truck hit him. Returning from his memories, he looked around and noticed 4 more people who had been hit by the car. They were lying unconscious. At that moment, a bright light enveloped the 4 people, and the boy looked up in surprise. He saw that they were glowing and thought that those people were conscious. Then he noticed with interest that he was not enveloped by the bright light, and suddenly a desperate voice sounded in panic. He loudly asked himself, what to do now? Tenno looked around to find the source of the voice, but there was no one around, and someone was still shouting loudly. The rest of the group had simply disappeared somewhere. The voice continued to echo in the space. It was addressing someone, telling how they were found. Another voice said that nothing more could be done. Suddenly one of them noticed that there was still one more person left in the room. Tenno awkwardly listened to their conversation. Suddenly the voices noticed the black-haired boy who remained in that space, and exclaimed with surprise he had not paid any attention to him before. Tenno, listening to their conversation, realized that he did not belong here, although not long ago he had been with those 4, he pondered. Then a voice sounded again in the space. A stranger indignantly reminded the interlocutor that he said, "Summoning creatures is a bad idea. It is a violation of the laws of the world." The interlocutor could not respond, and the voice continued that he still uses the summoning skill, although he is still a novice. A second voice sounded, trying to justify himself, and listened to their conversation with surprise. Suddenly, the black-haired boy began to disappear right into the air. Tenno realized with horror that he was falling. He did not understand what would happen to him. Soon the boy found himself in the forest. Tenno looked up in surprise. A dense canopy of trees appeared before him. The boy did not understand where he was. He got up from the ground as if under a burden. Tenno felt tired. His body was very heavy and sluggish, and then the boy finally stood up. Rising, he saw the forest. Tenno bitterly realized he was in it and moved forward, eager to leave this place as soon as possible, but the forest was dark and frightening, and it scared him. The boy began to guess where he had ended up based on what he heard in the conversation of unfamiliar voices. It seemed that Tenno had entered some kind of hero summoning ritual. The boy smiled at the very thought. Tenno remembered that his sister loved comics where the main hero was summoned to another world. His sister always told him such stories, but he never thought that something like that could happen to him, to be summoned to another world like a hero from fairy tales. Tenno realized that he found himself in another world and wondered if there was a way to return to his own world. Suddenly, the boy froze with rage and angrily pondered his situation. Then Tenno angrily poured out everything he thought about what had happened to him, and the echo of his scream spread through the forest. Now the boy felt a little better. He needed to calm down and figure out the whole situation that had happened to him. Tenno thought if his sister told him about what happens in other worlds, the boy remembered that there was usually magic and demons there. Thinking that there might be demons in this world, he realized with horror that a minute ago he had screamed too loudly, and he turned around to his relief. No one appeared in response to that scream. Sighing, Tenno finally realized that the situation was really bad. He felt unwell. Since waking up, he had felt as if something was clinging to his body. The boy looked at his palm. A strange feeling crept inside him, as if something was slowly penetrating his body. Tenno looked around, but only the rustling of forest leaves in the wind responded to him. The boy realized he needed to ask someone for help, but on the way he saw only trees. Waking up in this place, he felt that he was getting worse. Tenno had never been as tired as at this moment. The boy noticed that the forest he found himself in was too gloomy. He suspected that a curse might lie on it, which steals strength and makes him tired. The thought even flashed that an evil spirit was lurking in the forest, but the boy tried to drive these oppressive thoughts out of his head. Suddenly the wind in the forest intensified, and the leaves on the trees began to rustle wildly. Suddenly the boy felt a touch on his hand, and at that moment Tenno shuddered with fear. He quietly, somewhat embarrassedly muttered a cleansing spell to drive out evil. Suddenly the wind rose, and then just as suddenly disappeared. Complete silence fell in the forest. The boy, blushing with shame, realized his foolishness. He was afraid of something, although he did not even know if magic and spirits existed here at all. Tenno sighed deeply and suddenly noticed something. He looked at his palm in surprise. The boy felt much lighter than before, and Tenno realized that his life force in the body had been restored. Then the boy returned to the forest. Tenno looked at the thick smoke that appeared in the forest. Then Tenno loudly pronounced a cleansing spell, directing his palm towards the dark smoke. As soon as the boy cast the cleansing spell, thick black smoke slowly began to dissipate. The boy, slightly stunned, looked at his palm, raised it, and pointed at the black house. Tenno did the same and the black smoke dispersed. Tenno realized with horror that the evil spirit was actually inside him. It turned out that in this world magic could still be used. Tenno still believed that sometimes it is good to escape from reality after all. Now he knew that magic exists in this world, and suddenly the silence in the forest was broken by a sound. Behind the boy, the thunder of footsteps of a huge creature sounded. Tenno froze with fear. The boy began to turn in horror. At that very moment, a threatening roar came from the monster. Tenno sharply turned around to see the creature and found that behind the boy stood a wolf of incredible size. Tenno was instantly gripped by fear at its gigantic figure. The black-haired boy thought for a moment that there was a dog in front of him, but it turned out to be a wolf that looked at Tenno with a predatory gaze. The boy did not understand what to do in such a situation. Starting a fight with such an opponent would be unwise. Tenno carefully got up from his knees and tried to quietly and slowly step back. But suddenly the wolf took a step forward. Tenno was immediately frightened by the wolf's actions. He was sure that the monster would immediately chase him as soon as he started running. The boy desperately hoped that the wolf would just leave him alone. Then Tenno began to stare at the huge wolf. The black-haired boy noticed that the animal's paws were trembling. But he forgot about it. In any case, the guy in this situation resembled prey more than the wolf himself, so Tenno wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. At the very moment the boy moved, the wolf immediately lunged at him growling, and Tenno screamed in fright at the wolf's actions. But already in a moment, the monster, instead of running up to the boy and attacking, helplessly fell to the ground. The boy froze in shock, looking at the lying wolf. The monster gave a crooked smile and glanced back at Tenno, trying to defend itself from a possible attack. Then Tenno noticed that the wolf was also suffering from the black smoke that appeared in the forest. The monster, though lying exhausted on the ground, looked at the boy with a threatening smile. Tenno, though scared, still wanted to do something. Namely, the boy had to help this wolf. Although he was scared, he loved playing with animals very much. Moreover, the purification magic had affected him earlier, so the black smoke did not touch him, but Tenno was still afraid the wolf had scared him a lot. He still thought he should try to save the wolf, so the boy stretched out his palm toward the animal. At that very moment, Tenno uttered the cleansing spell over the wolf, and the black smoke that wrapped around the huge beast's body began to quickly disappear. Tenno smiled understandingly that the cleansing magic had worked now. The wolf was no longer affected by the dangerous influence of the black smoke and looked at him stunned. The creature did not understand what was happening or where the black smoke that enveloped it had gone. The wolf looked at its body with curiosity and did not feel tired at all. Tenno was touched by the actions of the giant wolf and wanted to pet him. Although he was huge, the wolf now seemed more cool than scary. The huge wolf was still dirty. Tenno, like a true Japanese, adored cleanliness. Meanwhile, the white wolf headed towards the boy. Only when the wolf approached him did Tenno come to his senses. He thought with fear that it wanted to attack him, and the boy became alert. But instead of attacking, the wolf rolled onto its back and showed its belly to the boy, indicating trust in Tenno. The boy looked at the lying wolf with admiration. Its fluffy belly made quite an impression. Then the wolf stood up, its fluffy tail wagging from side to side. The boy wondered how to wash the animal from the dirt and hoped that magic would help him with this. After that, the boy whispered a cleansing spell, and at that very moment, the wolf's dirty fur became clean, so the wolf looked much nicer than before. Tenno was already looking at that charming wolf with surprise and could not take his eyes off this pleasant beast. And when the wolf headed into the forest, the boy only then finally came to his senses from his enchanted gaze. He was shocked and asked the animal if it would go, but the huge wolf just turned around and looked at him with a piercing gaze. Soon the boy and the wolf were rushing somewhere. Tenno tried to outrun the wolf to keep up. The wolf only looked at him in surprise and realized that before him was not an ordinary boy. 200 years ago, this forest instantly fell into complete darkness. It was not something anyone could have done, but humanity did it one way or another. And since the darkness began to devour the forest, it has also captured all its animals. Weak monsters were exterminated, but the strong forest dwellers survived. Among them was King Fenrir, who had been guarding this forest for 200 years and had seen many of its inhabitants perish. He had enough magic to briefly hold back the darkness and prevent it from engulfing him. The cleansing magic he used to repel the darkness worked only temporarily, and the spells he had to recite consumed a large part of his magical power. With each repetition, the wolf exhausted his reserves much faster than usual. King Fenrir had long been in the forest and had spent too much magic. During this attack, he did not believe he would endure under the yoke of darkness for much longer. But the wolf did not allow himself such thoughts. Because of the coming darkness, he hated people, and Fenrir wanted to destroy everyone. Before the darkness consumed him, he was consumed by hatred for people. Suddenly King Fenrir smelled a human from afar, and enraged, rushed towards him. The wolf sought to destroy him. In his head there was only one thought. A huge desire to destroy a representative of humanity consumed him. The wolf lunged at the man, engulfed in rage. Soon a man with black hair appeared before him, Tenno, but Fenrir did not lose the desire to destroy this guy even for a moment. When the wolf approached him, he realized he was truly human, but suddenly Fenrir's powers left him and he could no longer stand still. King Fenrir smiled ominously at the man, disappointed that he had fallen powerless. The wolf did not expect to be so weak. All he could do was breathe heavily from exhaustion and glare fiercely at the enemy. When the boy suddenly began to approach him, the wolf did not want this at all, but the darkness was sucking the life force out of him and clouding his vision. Fenrir did not want to faint at this very moment. Vovka was overwhelmed by great disappointment, felt his helplessness and weakness before the man, and could only lie powerless on the ground. Suddenly King Fenrir felt something strong. The darkness evaporated, the body instantly became lighter, and the wolf looked at the boy who used cleansing magic on him with surprise. He thought that the effect of this magic would be temporary in normal cases. The return should come soon. However, time passed, and the wolf felt no return. He never came back. He was stunned by how much cleansing magic overflowed from that man. Tenno looked inquisitively at the wolf. King Fenrir felt the cleansing magic spreading throughout his body and healing him, and this sensation overwhelmed him. The wolf had never seen such precise and bottomless magic. With a threatening smile, he looked at the boy again. The man instantly became alert but was not afraid of him. For the first time, King Fenrir accepted a guest, but he was not at all shy to show that he obeyed Tenno. After some time, the boy climbed straight to the very top of the hill, where there was a flat surface covered with animals. Tenno easily climbed up the slope. The wolf also climbed beside him. The boy did not feel tired from such exertion. On the contrary, he was glad that all his muscles were working. Then the black-haired boy noticed how King Fenrir got up and headed somewhere. The wolf's actions caught Tenno's attention. Ahead of them awaited a cave, completely engulfed in dangerous darkness. Fenrir, sensing the darkness, immediately bared his teeth threateningly. The boy understood from his movements that he wanted to enter this cave, but still asked his companion about it. The wolf immediately nodded at his question, and Tenno was delighted by Fenrir's cute trick. Suddenly a cave appeared before them. Its end was not visible, and only one thing was clear. Darkness completely engulfed it. After some time, the boy finally headed toward the cave. Everything seemed suspicious to him. Tenno felt uneasy and did not want to go inside. But suddenly the slightly offended wolf gently nudged him in the side. Tenno awkwardly said that he was just joking. Then the boy applied cleansing magic to the entrance. After the boy used cleansing magic, the darkness in the cave began to slowly recede, and in the end only a little gloom remained. Now everything became much brighter. And it was then that the boy stepped into the cave. Tenno felt stunned that the curse of this place had not completely receded, and he could not get rid of the thought of how large this cave was. Suddenly the boy noticed something ahead. In the darkness, the eyes of creatures were shining, and Tenno realized wolves still roamed here. A pack of wolves with a predatory, threatening smile looked at the boy, but their future attack was stopped by King Fenrir. He growled low, trying to calm them. Only after that did the wolves calm down a little, although they still looked at the boy warily, and darkness hovered over their bodies. Tenno noticed this and quickly released cleansing magic on them. At that moment, the wolves felt the curse of darkness begin to leave them. The boy watched in horror at that heartbreaking scene. The wolves parted, and before him appeared a pack of other sick wolves, whom the darkness had so engulfed that it destroyed them. Fenrir looked at his 6 subordinates, destroyed by darkness, with ominous hopelessness. The other wolves, though not so weakened, also bitterly mourned the death of their relatives. Tenno, seeing their sad appearance, felt sorrow and decided to do everything necessary to cope with this situation and help the wolf pack. The boy imagined how this time the curse would recede much stronger, and at the same time began to use cleansing magic. White light filled the cave and rushed to the wolves, heavily sick from the curse, and the stream of cleansing magic began to wrap around their bodies. In a moment the darkness, along with the bodies of the dead wolves, began to gradually disappear, and the boy and the wolves watched this sadly. The boy noticed the creatures and saw that there were not only wolves, but also dogs. Tenno was surprised that wolves and dogs were together. Then the boy, with some disgust, noticed that the animals were dirty. After his words about dirt, they became even sadder. Tenno saw with surprise that the animals understood him, so he read a cleansing spell, and instantly the wolves and dogs became gentle, their fur became silky and clean. The boy looked at them with a smile. Now they seemed much friendlier. After tidying up the pack of wolves and dogs, Tenno wondered what to do next. Noticing two more passages in the cave leading deeper, the boy became curious and asked King Fenrir what was there, but King Fenrir knew nothing about it. Tenno realized that the animals really did understand him. He wondered if he could trust them and went further. The farther he moved along the underground passage, the darker it became around. The boy noticed this and wondered what was going on. Then he used cleansing magic. After some time, Tenno moved on, and the black-haired boy walking beside him did not forget to cleanse the place with cleansing magic. The boy smiled and said that there was a place in the distance that interested him. The wolf asked with interest what the master intended to do, and Akira replied that they would first find out how the barrier works, and then they would clear it. The king exclaimed joyfully that the barrier would not save him. This was the last evil attack on him. Gamels asked if this meant that someone had the power to destroy this country, and suddenly a sphere appeared above the stone. People in cloaks turned away, gripped by fear. The king's face was distorted with horror. Magical symbols on the floor began to glow. Above the stone of light, a magical cluster formed, from which cloaks of energy burst out. The people in cloaks screamed and scattered in different directions. The magical stone instantly darkened. Sparks fell from it. The king looked at the stone filled with a curse in horror. Meanwhile, Akira's face flushed. He smiled and thought that now he was satisfied. Koa flew over the forest and said that he did not believe he could inspect it all in one day. A few days ago, a fierce wind rose. The wolf loudly asked what kind of force it was. Koala joyfully exclaimed that the barrier sign, which was still felt nearby, disappeared. Spider asked with interest what happened to the master. Wolf looked at the golem and thought that he was fine. Kira shouted that he had returned. The boy asked curiously why everyone had gathered here, and Koa said that it seemed he was fine. He managed to raise a barrier of such scale, as expected. Akira happily exclaimed that it was so cool. He thought that when he returned home, there would already be a wooden floor. He went into the house to see how the renovation was progressing. He said joyfully that now there are sliding doors. Hear how smoothly they open and close. Doors in every room are a true dream come true. He looked at the golem pulling his trouser leg. Akira said he needed to touch the wall. The golem shook its head, saying he was right. The boy touched it and a cube fell out, and he asked them to use magic because it was more convenient that way. He smiled and said that he was finally well. It was time to extract oil, and Akira ran up to the table and joyfully exclaimed that this was a juicer powered by magical energy. The guy thought he had squeezed out a bit of oil for a test. It looked simply wonderful, but the juicer needs to be refined for mass production. Akira tasted and happily thought that fried eggplants were so delicious while the wolves surrounded him. He gave the wolves and spiders some vegetables so they could try them too. T and the other wolves approached Akira. He smiled and, as if thinking for a long time, said that his friends had recovered. One of the wolves asked if this man was really okay. He asked if they wanted some food. The wolves instantly began greedily devouring it, and Akira smiled, thinking they seemed to like vegetables, and the boy happily said yes, he should name them. Kuro said that now they are called Chaya Chada, the one with white spots, Chiryu, and the female, Shina, Shacha, Chami, the one with red eyes. Himacha behind his back golems were whispering something. The boy proudly said that all the names have Cha because they are the Cha family, so he is quite clever, and the doll led Akira somewhere and showed that their house now has a balcony. Akira settled into the chair and immediately began to enjoy the beautiful world, and the boy said that he could fry, but he still needed an iron frying pan. The boy thoughtfully asked how they could find iron ore. They had no magnets or anything similar, but a magnet turned out to exist. He had a white wallet with a magnet attached. Akira was walking through the forest. He smiled every time he went outside. He looked for iron ore. They entered a new cave and approached the crystals. The boy touched the magnet and said that although he just accidentally poked it, he was glad he remembered the clasp on the wallet. Kira asked if it was a volcanic zone or something like that. It was a pity he couldn't examine everything in detail. They had wanted this for the 5th day already, because this was another cave in which he was completely lost. The boy looked at the finds and said sadly that he had found so much ore, but not the one he needed. Akira left the cave and said disappointedly that he was a little tired. He noticed that Koa was shining with happiness and said that the catch had increased on the way, so it was time to return. They carried it home. Suddenly Akira stopped and said that there was another cave here. They went inside, and the boy exclaimed excitedly how beautiful it was. Looking closely at the walls, he noticed that many animals were stuck in them. Akira said it was ice, but he was not cold at all. Inside was a turquoise squirrel. It was alive, and the boy put his hands on the unusual stone in which the animals were trapped. The stone began to crack little by little. After some time, the ice began to crack little by little, and the squirrel broke free from captivity. Akira looked ahead anxiously. Akira saw the animal and exclaimed how cute it was, and the boy thought excitedly that they needed to be more careful. There was a wolf here, although it seemed uninterested in the squirrel. Akira looked at Shay and felt that he was alert. Koa, dissatisfied, asked him what he was going to do with that little creature. The squirrel ran up to the pieces of ice and began to scratch them with its paws. Akira freed the other animals. After some time, Akira found himself in a pile of squirrels that were happily crawling over him. Akira awkwardly thought that there were too many of them. He began to cry and hysterically shout that he needed to help the master. Akira was sweating, growling angrily, and shouted for the squirrels to run away from the owner, then laughed and said he was grateful to him. Honestly, he was a little tired of this. The first squirrel he saved climbed onto his shoulder. The boy smiled. She was alone, so she seemed even cuter. They left the cave and headed home. Akira said disappointedly that today he had checked 4 places, but there was no result. Kula added that he could not find any ore veins, and the boy replied that he had plenty of time and would be patient. The boy noticed a cave and said that this was the cave where Cheu and her friends were found. It was only 15 minutes to the house. By the way, were they searching here? He thinks it is pointless. Akira placed a magnet against the cave wall. Akira fell to his knees and thought in shock that it had been just around the corner all this time. Koa, also shocked, asked what had happened. Karen flew up to them and said that she also did not find any dragons today. Kola said she had returned, and the master had just come back as well. The bird looked happily at the boy. She noticed a squirrel and thought in shock what a small creature it was. Why was it with that man? The squirrel noticed the bird and immediately started to run away. She climbed onto a tall pole. Karen awkwardly admitted that she probably acted a little childishly. Suri said she did it even before she realized it, but he still did not understand. Akira put his finger to his face and, smiling, thought about all his animals. Akira found himself on the ground. Many little people were sitting in front of him. They were looking at him and did not take their eyes off him. The boy asked in surprise what was happening. He came into the garden and sighed, not hiding his amazement. Akira asked hesitantly, "Hasn't it been only 2 months since they started working on the land?" The boy pulled out a giant potato, then melons, and finally daikon, and Akira said in shock that they were all so big he had prepared them. Akira said they would set aside the one that was spicy but had a mild taste, and the one that was very sweet but too sharp. If everything worked out, maybe they could add more seasoning. The spider exclaimed joyfully with surprise, "How sweet this root is." Suri said he did not expect the harvest to be so large and decided that they should eat even more of it. Akira asked in surprise what they were all doing in the yard. Koa and the Sotlians were happily drawing something on the ground, and he thought that he barely noticed how a great map of hope for development appeared. Akira blushed and exclaimed in surprise, asking them to wait a minute with what they were doing, and happily thought that very soon he would make a frying pan from iron ore. The wolf felt as if he had been fighting an invisible enemy for a long time when suddenly his friends, swallowed by darkness, attacked him, and he almost lost himself and was already preparing for the end. He was still thinking. When he understood everything, only a few friends would remain. The wolf asked if this place was really built by one of the kings. He was told that they could hide in these depths. The wolf said they could rest a little and then fight the people to the end. Suddenly it became dark. The wolf opened his eyes and realized with surprise that he had lost consciousness, but where was he? He got up and wondered whether it was a healing wind or magical power. His body became lighter, his mind cleared. They were asked if they were alive, and the wolf answered yes. The wolf entered the forest and caught a rodent. He happily thought that he could finally hunt small prey. He was grateful to the healing wind. The miasma flooding the forest disappeared. He uncertainly wondered if the danger had really receded. A wolf approached him and asked if he could also go hunting. The wolf exclaimed joyfully that yes, he could help him. He said he hoped to help his friends at least a little. He heard a strange sound and screamed in fear. Something was approaching the entrance. Everyone who could still move had to follow him. They saw huge wolves. He shouted that there was King Fenrir and with him a fierce wolf, but they were too big. The wolf asked if it was a spider. They had never heard of spiders with threads. Vovk noticed Akira and shouted that there was a person to be killed. Koa and Shay growled angrily at them, ordering them not to dare approach the boy, and the wolves howled in fear. Akira was stunned, couldn't believe that Koa and T had grown so much. He walked around a bit, studying which plants could be grown here, and by trial and error made a frying pan. The boy continued to think that for variety, he went to explore the cave he had found earlier. They entered the cave together, with the spider descending on a thread. Akira screamed in surprise as the spider learned to use threads. He almost fell into the pit, but the tea saved him with magic, and the boy shouted in shock that tea has magic. Akira looked at the wolves and hesitantly thought that they were changing, transforming. He looked at the frightened wolves and thought that they had found them deep in the cave. The boy told them that they had already surrendered, knew how hard it was for them. Akira touched them and said he would invoke purification, lift the curse, and then heal. Vovk exclaimed excitedly that this was the magical power that cleansed and filled the forest. Koa said that this gentleman cleansed the forest and returned their strength. The wolf asked what kind of lord this man was. The man himself could not understand that the king of the forest, Fenrir, called him lord, and the beast looked at the happy man and wondered what kind of pure magic this was. The wolf happily thought that his heart was filled with love for the master. Akira noticed how the wolf wagged its tail from side to side. He thought with surprise that it was a dog and that it was smaller than Chai on the first day. Akira kept convincing himself that he was begging him to stay that way forever, because otherwise everyone would look down on him. Akira returned home with new and old friends. The boy looked at his land. He said with a smile that he was not used to such sizes. He noticed trees that were not here when he walked. Akira rushed there, shouting that the field behind the house had turned into a forest. In the morning, there was nothing there. The spider joyfully shouted that the master had returned home. The spider proudly shouted that by Golem's order he himself gathered and planted those fruit trees the master wanted, and that it was all thanks to his family. But the ants said it was not true at all. They worked many times harder. The wolves feared and wondered what kind of madness this was, such large insects. Akira noticed how they began to faint and thought they were in shock from what they saw. Akira and his friends went to the forest again. One boy joyfully exclaimed that now they had their own garden. Akira blossomed with joy and thought, how did they manage to plant everything in half a day? Then they returned home. The big ones carefully gathered the fruits and brought them to Akira, and the boy put them in pots and said with a smile that wine can be made from grapes or something similar to them. The boy lifted the frying pan and thought that in a month he could make a cast iron one. That is a lot of time. He even gave names to the stones and ores that had served him until now. He added that he called it a universal stone. Parts of his house and golems are made from it. It is easy to work with, and it can store magical power. Kira thought that fake or simple iron was hard to work with, but the instruments he really wanted were indeed made. Silver and gold ores are the strongest. He noticed that the fluffy one was acting strange. He handed Akira an empty jar. Akira asked if something had happened to him. The boy filled the jar with pebbles and thought that the magic stone was a stone that enhances magical power. Such stones can be found in monsters. Akira carefully cleaned and rubbed the food in the frying pan. Kiro wrung out the rag, poured the excess water onto the grass, and smiled. This vegetable is very similar to a potato. He will try to extract starch from. I saw this on TV, and everything seemed very simple there. Kira returned to the kitchen and decided to repeat the process twice more. What came out, he would put on a plate and leave to dry. He touched the substance and thought it worked. The boy looked at the golems and thought that the new ones were resting upstairs, and all the others were outside, right? Recently, huts were built for them, so now they are all there. Kira sadly felt lonely. Everyone had become too big, and the golems could no longer grow to 4 floors. The boy took the rabbit meat and put it on the plate. He said he would rub salt into the rabbit meat, coat the meat in starch, and fry it in a cast iron skillet. It is simply wonderful for frying meat. Akira put the meat on the plate and joyfully exclaimed that it was time to taste it. The boy took a bite and thought with delight that it was so tasty. Akira picked up a piece of the cooked food with chopsticks, tried it, and exclaimed that the taste was sweet and rich. Akira took a piece into his mouth. The next moment a spider appeared before him. He screamed in surprise. Where did it come from? The spider tore off a piece of meat, and the boy whispered not to tell anyone about it. The dark-haired boy took a knife in his hands and began cutting the food. Gradually, he started throwing the cut pieces into the water. Akira stood by the cauldron with food boiling on the fire, grabbed a spoon, and began stirring the water. It turned purple. Akira smiled, holding the pot with food in his hands, then took a large spoon and began stirring it. Golem approached him. The lizard hid in a burrow and watched what they were doing outside. Kola caught the smell and licked his lips. He said that the master had started cooking. The lizard, hiding under a stone, looked at the boys enchantedly. Chai said he had never before smelled such a sweet scent, and Koa raised his head and asked Karen if there was any news. The little bird replied excitedly that, having lifted the barrier, she had only inspected its half, so they rest here. Kira held plates with prepared food in both hands. Hearing a noise, he looked away in surprise. Kola proudly replied that he was guarding the master's piece. Akira came out with baked meat and, smiling, said that they could start eating. The animals shouted joyfully. The boy laid it out and said that now that they had sugar, they could eat red meat from the plate. Skriaj shouted that he didn't know what it was, but it was tasty. Ko ate his portion and shouted to the spider that it was very tasty. Let him give his share. Karen cried and said that her hard work was finally rewarded. Flying through the miasma and searching for the dragon is not easy. Suri said that lately there was a strong presence of the dragon in the air, but it was hard to find him, and Karen cheerfully exclaimed that it was true she was getting lost and couldn't find him. Akira put piece after piece into his mouth. The animals around him closed their eyes in pleasure and then came to life. All the animals screamed in fright. They were very surprised to see the earth dragon in front of them. They shouted that it was the earth dragon. Akira looked and smiled. How cute he was and how long had he been here. Faffy joyfully flew up to him. Akira's face blushed, and he said in surprise that they were really cute. How long had they been here? The lizard's face lit up, and the fluffy creature flew into the air. The dragon flew up and began to rejoice together with the fluffy one. Akira asked in surprise why he was flying and why they seemed to get along. The boy thought with interest why he considered them one species. The dog sat nearby and, stunned, looked at them. She wondered what kind of strange place this was and who this creature was. The sorcerers gathered around the magic stone. The king exclaimed, not believing that the barrier was intact. In the center of the magical symbols on the floor lay a magic stone, around which stood people in dark cloaks with hoods. A grimace of anger appeared on the king's face. He opened his mouth wide and shouted loudly that the mages must find out within a month why this happened. Sweat droplets rolled down the face of one of the mages. He closed his eyes and bowed his head, listening to the king's shouting. Several people in robes were talking animatedly among themselves, and nearby on the floor lay a girl light-haired with cat ears. The sorcerer, without turning around, said, "How many more lives must I give to restore the magic stone? This country provokes the wrath of the whole world, and it is simply terrible," while the other mages looked at him with fear. The spider descended from the tree and said that lately his children had learned to skillfully handle the thread, and their main task was to maintain the fire and quickly kill enemies. He told the children that the Lord, every time he saw them, sent them visions about how to use Nika. They tried to use it because with Nika you can catch prey, and it will not be able to escape. The spider tirelessly repeated that they could also set a trap. He thought they had evolved significantly. The spider exclaimed joyfully that yes, they would try to do it. The gentleman had many wonderful ideas. Kiro returned home and brought dragons with him. He said that now they have a flying lizard. No, of course, that is not true. Today is too hot to think about it. He says that it is actually a lizard, and it is given all sorts of names. Bright yellow, like a Tyrannosaurus, maybe Terra or Cuckuchin, and at the same time resembling a salamander, maybe Jormungand or Leviathan. Akiro got angry because there was no reaction, but he was a flying lizard. The beast suddenly began to wave its tail quickly, and the boy asked in surprise what a soaring lizard was. Kiro thought he had already come up with all the new names for the dog without even thinking. Soren, Onrin, Ranki, Amy, Amu, Heime. If he really tried, he could come up with a good name. The boy proudly said that the soft shade of the fur was very similar to indigo he had seen before. He could not be mistaken. The golems could not understand what he wanted. Kiro approached the river and dived into the water. He surfaced and shouted joyfully, "What a pleasant feeling. It was unbearably hot here, probably around 40 degrees. Is it really so hot in this world in summer?" The boy was swimming in the lake. A lizard was splashing nearby. Fluffy landed on his head, and Akira said that the river flowing through the forest was the best. He continued speaking, not hiding his surprise that they had directed the river's course right here. While the forest in the clearing was increasingly burning, he noticed how the wolves were jumping on the trees. Akira said that even so they continued to watch him. The boy waved to them and thought as if wolves were jumping on the trees. This world is truly amazing. Koa wearily lay down on the ground and said that the season that disappeared for hundreds of years seemed to have returned. That, too, was the power of the Lord. Chai admitted that he was seeing it for the first time, but was it really summer? Koa smiled and asked what was so hard for him to endure. He looked at the spider and replied that everything was fine with him, and Chai added that after all he was the lord of the infernal fire. Spider said that King Fenrir would not withstand such a temperature. Koa shouted irritably that nothing of the sort is enjoying the warmth after a long break. The spider said that they might be fine, but wouldn't it affect the master? Koa said he had already thought about it. Akira got out of the water and said that for some reason his head was spinning. The boy asked with interest what he was sitting on, looked at the strange creatures with whom Fluffy was playing. Akira thought they had eyes. Fluffy, he did it. They do not attack, so they are not enemies. The spider said that they were playing with the main water spirits. The spirits love beautiful magic, but he had never seen so much magic. The master must be careful and not use too much magic. Kiro choked and coughed. The spider anxiously turned to the Lord and asked if something was wrong. The boy shouted not to worry, he was fine, and he thought that this was truly another world. They returned home and ate. Kiro awkwardly said that the meat and potatoes he cooked in the morning disappeared in an instant. If he cooked 3 times more, he would need 3 or 5 more pots. All the animals fought for food. The boy told the golems that if they helped him with cooking, he could cook more and maybe manage to settle the quarrel. For this, the kitchen space would have to be expanded. Kira again insisted that the stove's power needed to be increased, and that somehow they had to deal with this heat, while he himself tiredly thought that his head was spinning. The slaves lined up in a row. The wizard ordered the worker to send these 100 into the room with the magic stone. The magic stone can be restored thanks to their help. The wizard thought that, judging by their condition, their number would simply increase. Then he remembered the face of the dying enemy and wondered in surprise, why did it imprint in his memory just like that? He added that they had always been slaves born for this, temporary warriors, material for experiments, or those who performed the lowest paid work. The sorcerer thought that in this country this was considered normal. Previously, anyone who protested was publicly executed, so now no one objects. The man continued to think that many people believed they were needed for a fulfilling life. That was exactly what this country was like. Akira went to the river to rest a little in the water. The sun stood high in the sky. Akira folded his hands and laid his head on them. Akira was all wet, he was in the water, and next to him was a fluffy creature. The boy raised his hand and said that it seemed he did not have a fever. Probably because of the heat he couldn't sleep, and it was so pleasant in the river as if the soul became free. Akira raised his eyes to the sky through the branches of the trees and felt that he could not stay here forever, so he had to figure out how to prevent the curse without leaving the river. He thought that he still did not know if there was any civilization here. If it was about the curse, didn't people create it? Maybe somewhere here there are people. Akira looked away and said that it seemed to him as if they were not in a forest. Maybe this whole world was just a forest. He shook his head and shouted, "No, I'm sure there were supposed to be people here. Please just let them exist. What kind of curse is this anyway?" The slaves headed to the room with the magic stone. Akira said that in Japan curses are tied to the image of the specific person who cast them, and this entire forest here is cursed. The boy still told himself that it was just his own invention about the curse, or can a curse be tied to a place, for example to spirits connected with the land? He looked at the lizard and shouted that no, that's unlikely. It's getting more interesting, but the scariest thing is the clingy shadow. Cal and Karen ended up in the state where it stuck to them. Akira believed that they just needed a little cleansing. Others were almost possessed a terrible curse. There is nothing good about curses. The wolves were rushing after the prey. Suddenly Koa stopped and asked how it feels, and Akira replied that when the body's master constantly consumes, it's more like turning into a demon than a curse. He said that to prevent evil from being summoned, something like a magic circle is needed, a magic circle, and yes, he doesn't understand this at all. Akira smiled and said that if it's not a demon but a curse, then it's worth finding a way to get rid of its source, whether it's a person or an object. Akira admitted that he understands nothing about magic circles, so he uses a black stone. If they try to make a sacrifice for the curse, it will harm them. Akira sat in the water on the stones, his face thoughtful. Then he raised his head and said sadly that a curse can really be very dangerous, and one must be careful with it. The man ran a knife over his skin. Several people with cat ears appeared on the ground. Mages stood in the room silently watching what was happening. The boy smiled and said that it's true, a countermove must be made, and then everything will work out. But if it's just an ordinary curse, it's better to imagine the black stone as an image again. In the room around the magical stone gathered many people, and the boy smiled, saying that this was the correct and safe way to seal the curse for everyone, and now activation. One of the chief mages felt something and frowned. A bright glow dispelled the darkness. It was a magical stone that began to shine. People noticed the bright glow and began to cover their eyes with their palms. Mages one by one fell to the ground and, screaming, rushed to flee. They did not understand what had happened. The slaves were unharmed, nothing happened to them. The wizard ran up to his friend and anxiously asked what had happened, if he was okay, but he did not answer. The man was unconscious. Then the wizard rushed to the chief mage and shouted in horror, "What was that?" The chief mage looked shocked at the magical stone, tied with a rope and sealed with an amulet. Kira opened his eyes and with surprise realized that he had just done something. In a moment he got up, straining to push himself, and then whispered that he was just tired and needed rest. The golems firmly held Akira by the shorts, and in front of him stood a white wolf. On Akira's head sat a fluffy creature. Akira said that today he would go to sleep early. Half of the people came to the settlement. The healthy carried their friends on their backs, and a girl from the farm shouted in surprise, "Who is this?" Some more time passed, and the boy anxiously realized that the darkness did not recede, although he had already used cleansing magic many times. Soon Tenno noticed that the darkness had again cast a curse on the wolf. It was dangerous for them, so the boy urgently needed to come up with something, and suddenly he thought of the idea to use a barrier to protect them from the curse. The idea was good, but Tenno found it hard to imagine, and finally he came up with, instead of wasting energy on separate barriers, combine them all into one. The boy instantly cast a protective spell on the pack of wolves walking with him. Warm light enveloped them, and the animals immediately felt better. Tenno saw the barrier around them and felt that his spell had worked, but the question in his mind did not subside. Would this shield withstand physical blows, and what awaited in the dark depths of the underground passage he did not yet know. So the boy decided to strengthen the barrier. He wanted it to repel both magical and physical attacks. The next moment, the boy decided to try adding a protective function to the barrier against attacks. He cast a spell on the barrier to strengthen it. After that, the barrier suddenly became thicker and much stronger. Fenrir looked at the man with surprise and a question, and Tenno explained to him that he had simply strengthened the barrier around everyone now. Nothing threatened them. The boy and the pack of wolves moved further through the underground passage, and Tenno constantly drove away the darkness and cleared the way. After some time, the boy excitedly noticed that this cave was much larger than he had imagined, but he did not stop and went further. Only darkness awaited them ahead. Tenno thoughtfully turned over in his mind how to drive the darkness out of the cave. With magic, only night vision or clairvoyance came to mind. He did not know at all what to imagine to solve this situation, namely, how to recognize the shape of the space surrounding him. Then the boy used the spell of night vision and spatial awareness, simultaneously closing his eyes, and at that moment, with his eyes closed, he saw the space of the cave. Although it was only a projection in his head, everything felt real. The boy wanted to cleanse every inch of this place. Tenno applied his cleansing magic to the cave. When the darkness in the cave disappeared, he set a barrier so that it would never appear here again. Tenno looked at the cleansed cave with a smile. Now he saw it clearly. Suddenly, the entire pack of wolves bared their fangs and growled threateningly, looking in one direction. The boy looked at them with anxiety. Tenno turned toward the side where the animals were baring their teeth, and suddenly a huge black boulder rose before him. He froze in surprise, but at that moment an explosion sounded and bright light illuminated the cave. The boy only managed to close his eyes from the dazzling light, and then, in cold sweat, looked again at the dark boulder. It was embedded in the wall. Tenno was frightened and stunned by what had happened, and the boy realized that something had struck his barrier and eagerly asked Fenrir if there was any curse on the boulder. Indeed, he did not answer him. The wolf only stared piercingly at the boy with black hair. Tenno was enchanted by this fluffy, cute animal. The attachment to the wolf immediately faded when the black boulder attacked him again. The only reason the boulder could not hurt them was the barrier the boy had set, but the boulder still kept attacking, and the barrier stopped it, while Tenno watched the boulder. The boy thought it was alive and noticed Fenrir growling. The white wolf behaved the same way as during their first meeting, and Tenno applied cleansing magic to the boulder. Although a cleansing spell was cast on the stone, nothing changed. Tenno realized the magic did not work. The curse was too strong, or his cleansing was too weak. So the dark-haired boy considered this and strengthened the effect of the cleansing spell on the stone even more. Until then, he had imagined getting rid of the curse like in the movies, but he already knew such tricks would not work on a solid rock. He had to imagine the curse of darkness as something much more resilient, something that could not be easily removed. Tenno wanted the curse on the stone to slowly peel off and disappear forever. After thinking, the boy began to recite the cleansing spell over the boulder. In a moment, the curse began to leave the boulder. It peeled off it like a thin film. The curse in the form of a film finally detached from the boulder and disappeared forever, and suddenly a bird appeared before them. It turned out that it was the one under such a strong influence of darkness, and Tenno, seeing it, froze in shock. Soon the little bird regained consciousness and climbed out of the deep darkness. Standing on its feet, it began to energetically flap its wings. She flew straight to Tenno. The boy managed to extend his hand so that she landed on his palm, and looking closely, he noticed with horror that she was injured. Healing the wounds was difficult, but the boy wanted to do it. At first, Tenno wanted to heal her sick cells, and only then heal the wound, and then the boy applied healing and cleansing spells to the bird. At that moment, all the dirt and all the wounds disappeared from the little bird's body. The boy admiringly assessed its majestic appearance, but in his opinion, the size was unfortunate. The bird got angry because of the boy's last comment about her figure, and began pecking his palm indignantly. Tenno apologized to the outraged bird. Then, as if apologizing, he gently stroked her little head. The bird also began to snuggle and enjoy his stroking. Tenno was touched by this sight, and the boy immediately forgot about the recent pain. When the boy finally cleared the boulder from the darkness, he thought to take a short break to rest and regain strength. While Tenno was resting, he looked at the walls that shone brightly. The barrier he created protected him and the other companions from the influence of darkness. So much happened to the boy with black hair that he was a little confused and did not understand anything. Suddenly a loud knock sounded in the cave. The wolves became alert and stood next to the barrier. It turned out that this black darkness was trying to break through the Tenno barrier. More and more darkness tried to break through the barrier, protecting the living to touch everyone, and Tenno was a little afraid that his barrier would not hold. The boys silently watched as the darkness tried to destroy the barrier, but it was strong and did not let it through. Tenno, seeing this, calmed down and turned away. He wanted to think about that magical power that later awakened in him. Now it seemed that everything was safe. The barrier he created reliably protected them from the curse of darkness, but the boy was troubled by something. He was interested in only one thing. He was very surprised when he noticed that the pack of wolves looked happier than before. The animals were relaxed and looked simply wonderful. Tenno became worried. He did not see the wolf pack eating anything. Moreover, earlier they were all sluggish and tired. The boy did not think for long. No matter how much he thought, he simply could not understand anything, so now he had to think about the most important things: a safe place, water, and food. For them to survive, he needed to take care of the essentials. Tenno was still alive, so he firmly decided to get out of here. He was not going to lose just because he got into trouble. The boy felt relief. This cave was suitable for a safe overnight stay. If he managed to clear it, they could spend the night here. First, he had to deal with that black shadow. Blow after blow fell on the barrier. The darkness relentlessly tried to break through. Tenno realized, if the barrier reacts, it means the darkness is seeping in from somewhere. Seeing this, unrest stirred in his soul. Tenno decided that something had to be done urgently. The boy, who had been using magic all this time, realized that he would not be able to perform the cleansing if he did not know where he was. First, he needed to fully explore the cave and cleanse it, but Tenno did not know if he could solve this with magic, so he tried to use a terrain study spell. Dim image of a forested area appeared before him, but Tenno could barely make it out. A dark shadow tightly enveloped everything. If only he could look from the other side, maybe something could be done. Through the thick dark shadow, he could not check anything when he was outside. The boy was completely confused because of the problem that arose during the inspection of the area. And then an idea occurred to him: to use the gift of clairvoyance. Tenno longed for magic that would allow him to see everything from different perspectives, namely something that would allow him to freely look from above. And immediately one answer appeared in his mind: a drone. Tenno understood. To explore the area, he needed to imagine a drone spell. Once a boy saw on television a beautiful raspberry sunset and canyon filmed by a drone, and it amazed him incredibly. Then Tenno began to imagine the clairvoyance spell as a drone with great enthusiasm, and at that moment, a system unit appeared before him. Tenno blossomed with joy. He succeeded. His plan came true. Before him appeared a monitor showing the entire forest area. Darkness densely enveloped the forest, and among it stood out a mountain with a flat summit. Tenno clearly understood that they were now on a fairly large mountain. He also noticed the entrance through which he had entered this cave. On the mountain, this entrance looked very small. Now he only had to imagine how he would cover this place with a dome barrier and carry out a cleansing from darkness. The boy also recalled a spell that could banish the curse. He wondered, would it disappear from this place if the shadow of the dart were erased? He liked the idea that the darkness could disappear from these lands. Then the boy cast a cleansing spell. At that moment, the monitor showed how all the darkness on the mountain completely dissipated. In the next moment, Tenno swiftly raised a barrier over the area to prevent darkness from returning to the mountain. The bright light momentarily blinded everyone, and the animals were stunned by all the boy's actions. Tenno felt something burst from his body, magic that overflowed him. The darkness from every corner of the area began to vanish rapidly, and the barrier above it shone brightly. Now the place was completely cleansed of the curse of darkness. The shadows melted away, and all nature shone brightly, filled with fresh aromas from the retreat of darkness. The boy joyfully watched this through his monitor. At the same time, a pack of wolves looked with surprise at their cleared and calm forest. After an hour, Tenno was very irritated. He was annoyed that the widow's darkness appeared in the area, although he had set a barrier, and then he noticed that a dark shadow was coming from something. The darkness appeared here not from above, but from beneath the ground, and Tenno froze in shock. His barrier turned out to be useless. But he instantly came to his senses. The angry boy was irritated by all this darkness, and he had to resort to magic again. Then the boy expanded and deepened the barrier so that it broke through all the way to the ground, all this so that the darkness would definitely not appear in this zone. The boy stubbornly stood against the darkness. He was ready for anything to drive out the darkness and chase it from the forest. Then the boy again used cleansing magic and poured it out with extraordinary force. Tenno also cast a barrier spell. Instantly, bright light illuminated the entire area, and the barrier again hung over it. When finally a certain section of the forest was completely cleared and protected from the cursed darkness, Tenno wearily sat down on the stone floor. Physically he was fine, but in his head a complete collapse. He was exhausted from the heavy use of magic. Tenno felt with an awkward smile that his hands were trembling from fatigue. He wearily leaned on his hands. The boy did not know what to do or how to behave in this situation. He just wanted to return to his world. But his sad thoughts were interrupted by an approaching wolf. Fenrir lay on the boy's knee, becoming a support. Tenno, laughing tiredly, asked if he was really a wild beast. Tenno knew that nothing could be done about what had happened. No matter how much he thought about it, there was no point in being sad. He sincerely hoped that his magic had worked and cleansed the mountain, and he noticed that after meeting the wolf he had changed a lot. Meanwhile, in another place, it was deep night, 2 moons shone brightly in the sky, and the inhabitants of the kingdom were sleeping quietly. Only in the royal palace did something unexpected happen. In the room hung an unprocessed dark stone glowing brightly, and suddenly a small crack appeared on it. The next morning, a subordinate informed the king that something strange had happened to the forest king Fenrir. Sitting on the throne, the man arrogantly awaited good news about the forest king. The subordinate continued speaking. It turned out that in the central part of the forest, a glow was noticed that affected most of the lands. The king smiled arrogantly upon hearing the news. He thought that the glow meant the last moment of the forest king and his lineage. Then the man in the crown ordered his subordinate to bring more gifts to the devil's stone. He immediately obeyed his king, while the king himself was beside himself with the news of the forest king's death. There was very little time left, and he would finally be able to make the world his own, even this forest. The king looked out the window with a gloomy gaze. Soon the monsters that had been sleeping all this time would awaken. So he demanded even more lives as a sacrifice for the kingdom of Unpara. Lifeless bodies of representatives of the beast race lay in the room with the dark stone, and the devilish stone instantly absorbed their life force. Thanks to the life force, the demonic stone revealed its power. Meanwhile, in another kingdom in the royal palace something was happening. The beast king learned from a subordinate that something was happening in the forest. Nothing strange had happened there for 10 years, and only now something occurred. This surprised him. He knew that the kingdom of Imparas had placed a complex curse on this forest, the Icy Bell. Many sacred beasts had died, and the forest had plunged into dark energy. Over these 200 years, several countries bordering the forest were also destroyed. Ansparas gave tens of thousands of lives for its defense, and a subordinate, hearing the king's words, declared that he would not succumb to fear. The king realized that only humans were capable of such cruel deeds. If their race conquered the world, then the Mentor's kingdom would also be destroyed. This realization fell as a heavy burden on the man of the beast race. He prayed to God and in his thoughts begged to save them from this disaster. Meanwhile, in the forest on the mountain, a black-haired boy woke up. Tenno came out of the cave. The boy looked at the clear sky, and his mood immediately lifted. Around him gathered a cheerful pack of wolves. Fenrir had also just woken up. Tenno froze, captivated by Fenrir's actions. He stared long at the white wolf and wondered where the pack would go when this power retreated. Then Tenno called the silver wolf. Fenrir immediately turned to the boy, and Tenno asked the pack leader if they wanted to go with him. Fenrir, hearing the boy's question, froze for a moment and looked at him with a long, vigilant gaze. Tenno smiled and thought that the silver wolf understood nothing. Although the wolf did not understand him, the boy still wanted to give them names. First, he gave a name to the silver wolf he met first. Tenno named him Kalo. Then he gave names to those who also had the same silvery fur as the cow. He named the she-wolf Soa and the wolf Hio. Then appeared those with white and black fur, both males. Tenno named the black-haired wolf Shin and the white-haired one Kuro, and the latter did not look like an ordinary wolf at all, rather resembled some kind of mix with a dog, and the boy named him Tea. After the boy, over a cup of tea, gave names to the entire wolf pack, his attention was drawn to the last little bird. Tenno named her Karen. She had beautiful wings and a cute chirp. The boy was proud of himself. He thought he was good at inventing names. Tenno remembered that his sister did not think so, but he did not want to think about it. Karen chirped with joy. She had her own name. The boy suddenly broke off his thoughts. It was time to return to reality, and Fenrir silently watched the dark-haired boy. The silver wolf was wildly delighted Tenno had given him a name. In fact, they were not wolves, but beasts called Fenrils. The federal subordinates addressed their king with a question about who this man was. They wanted to know how he managed to give them names, and the federal pack froze in amazement. As far as Cow knew, nothing like this had ever happened in the entire history of the federal. Eventually, they recognized him as their master, the one who possessed the magic of banishing evil and healing. In fact, the Fenhol pack was indebted to him after Tenno saved them, and their magic also began to return. Cow's subordinates noticed this too, and Cow continued speaking. Because of all this, they, the Fenrils, will obey Tenno as their lord. Then the silver Fenril returned to Dayoff. Kyle wanted to know what Chai thought about this, since he himself was not a Fenril. Dayoff was allowed to hide in their shelter, so he was not going to refuse this. T was of the same race as Dayoff, but Tenno took him for a dog. Cow finally decided, to thank the boy for everything, they would dedicate themselves to serving the master. At the same time, Tenno addressed Cow they needed to find a place with water, but the boy suddenly froze and fell silent. To his surprise, a whole pack of wolves was looking at him with piercing eyes, and the boy felt awkward for a moment. Awkwardly, he repeated to them once again that he wanted to find a place with water. Cheyenne and Kuro gladly and enthusiastically led their master to the place with water. They eagerly desired to serve him. Tenno was stunned by this. Meanwhile, Kuro and Shin were already far ahead, so the boy had to immediately descend the mountain to catch up with them. The dark-haired boy was afraid of such a descent, but he rushed down the slope, shouting, and his cries scared one Fenril, who ran after him. Soon they all descended from the mountain and found themselves among the trees. The Fennels did not stop for a moment. They wanted so much to show the boy the place with water, and Tenno was stunned with amazement. They even passed beyond the barrier, but still had not reached the designated place. Soon the boy found himself right in front of some body of water, but as soon as Tenno saw it, he immediately darkened. The appearance of this place shocked him. The water was polluted, and darkness prevailed around. The water bubbled loudly from pollution and darkness. Steam rose from it. Tenno froze. The sight of this water depressed him. It was not what he expected. The boy wanted to tell Kuro and Shin that there was a problem with the water and that this was not the place he wanted, but he fell silent because of their eyes full of expectation. Tenno wanted to continue. He said that even if purification was applied, the boy stopped again. Because he was not allowed to say this sad news because of the waiting eyes on the faces of the Fenhols. And Kuro patiently and gently waited for praise from Tenno. The dark-haired boy was stunned by their sweet actions. Then the boy, stammering a little, patted the Fenhols on the heads and praised Kuro and Shin for their help and for answering instead of him. He smiled, but tears lit up in his eyes from that depressing situation. If he did not replenish his strength, he would not endure. At that moment, the silver wolf ran into the room. He also eagerly wanted to hear praise from the dark-haired boy, and Tenno could only praise everyone once again. After some time, the whole flock of Fenhols and Shai gathered around the boy. Tenno barely dragged himself on the ground, exhausted. The exhausted boy sadly apologized to them. He would not be able to drink that water. It would be wonderful if spring water was also inside the barrier. The boy was exhausted. He really wanted to drink clean water. Tenno sadly thought about the water he wanted to drink. At that moment, warm light appeared on his palm, and water emerged from the same palm. It turned out that the boy summoned water with magic. As soon as he imagined the water, it appeared. Water calmly sat in his palm, and Tenno was glad to have magic. Then a thought flashed through the boy's mind. If he wanted to eat his fill, then food would appear. The boy was fired up by an interesting idea, so he immediately tried to summon gyudon with an egg and soy sauce, and Tenno was inspired by this and also wanted to deliciously eat this dish. However, the magic did not create the dish he imagined. For a moment there was silence, and the Fenrils looked inquisitively at the boy's actions. Tenno coughed, blushed shyly, and then quickly changed the subject, so ordering a dish in the restaurant became impossible. Then the boy had another idea about summoning. This time. He decided to try to summon ingredients, and immediately Tenno loudly shouted the word, cabbage. But nothing happened. The cabbage did not appear, and Tenno felt awkward. While the animals continued to look at the dark-haired boy with questioning eyes, they did not understand what he was doing. But the boy did not stop there. Tenno even tried to summon ingredients like a chicken wing and an apple. But again nothing happened. No food appeared before him, so Tenno sat down on the ground tired and irritated, calling it was pointless. Then it dawned on him that he could not create what did not exist in this world, so the boy sadly had no other choice. He would have to look for food here. Tenno took that mountain as a landmark so as not to get lost in the forest. The boy looked around searching for food and dreamed of coming across fruit trees along the way. Walking through the forest, the boy came across mushrooms on the way, but Tenno did not want to take the risk and did not try them. The search for food continued, and he, together with a pack of other animals, looked for food for himself. The boy carefully examined every tree on the path, but in vain. Not a single fruit tree. No flowers, no fruits, only ordinary trees grew in this forest. Tenno was exhausted. He found nothing in the district, wasted his strength in vain and became hungry, but suddenly a silver wolf pushed him from behind Ko's minion. He tried to attract his attention. Hio's strike stunned Tenno. The boy looked at the wolf with sadness and questioning. Meanwhile, Kuroshin and Hio exchanged glances and, without hesitation, decided instantly rush somewhere, while Tenno remained standing, stunned by their actions. He never understood where they went. The wolves disappeared from his sight in an instant, and the boy only looked after them in surprise. He turned to Koa and pointed at the fleeing wolves, but Fenrir only howled soothingly and showed no sad emotion. The boy immediately calmed down. He was delighted by Kao's actions. Although his howling sounded impressive, Tenno still understood nothing. Koval did not take his eyes off the boy with black hair, and Tenno thought that the silver wolf finally began to think about his own. The boy tried to calm the silver wolf, told Ko that they would return soon, and for now would go look for more supplies. Tenno was worried about the 3 wolves who ran away. He hoped very much that they would return. Then he and the rest of the pack set out to look for food, while huge trees still stood around. The boy was angry. His stomach loudly grumbled from hunger. Tenno was very hungry, and it was bad because the boy had not yet found any food. He did not know what to do. In this world, there were neither flowers nor fruits, and Tenno thought about how to survive and find food. When suddenly something caught his attention, the boy noticed something near them. So he found a new cave. Tenno was happy about this event. He looked lively at the found place. The boy noticed that the previous cave was cramped and the exit too narrow, and decided that the new cave he found was a great place for a camp. Tenno told Cow this and cheerfully reminded himself that he should have been more careful when entering the cave. For the first time, Tenno used magic and scanned the cave's space with it. He looked around the cave with admiration. It turned out to be very spacious. Then the boy noticed there was also a passage upwards in the cave about 2 or 3 stories high. Tenno was completely mesmerized and did not take his eyes off the space of this cave. Suddenly he felt something. The boy instantly stopped using clairvoyance magic. In front of him lay a fallen huge demonic boar, and next to the monster rejoiced Shin, Koro, and Hio. Tenno froze from what he saw. The boy cried out in surprise for a moment. Before him lay a huge, defeated boar, immersed in darkness. Tenno suddenly realized that 3 wolves went hunting, and Shin, Koro, and Hio howled happily, agreeing with the boy's words. Tenno was touched by this sweet scene, as all 3 were extremely cute, but when the boy looked at the prey they had caught, the terrible appearance of the boar did not ignite his appetite at all, and he was simply horrified by the food offered to him. But he could not refuse the 3 wolves after all. They went hunting for him and brought the prey, and the boy was overcome by their actions, so he had no choice but to eat the boar. Hio with a sweet face awaited praise from the boy, and this moved Tenno even more. Held all 3 tightly to himself, while Shin, Koro, and Hio enjoyed his touches. Although the boy was glad to pet the wolves, he understood well that he would have to cut the meat of the demonic boar. When the guy praised the trio, he began to slash the boar cloak. At first, Tenno applied a true cleansing from darkness to the prey. To make the darkness completely disappear from the monster, he imagined this cleansing as a vacuum cleaner. Tenno continued to cast a cleansing spell on the body of the demonic boar, but there was too much darkness, and due to the difficulty of purification, he simply dispelled everything that was soaked with the curse. The next moment, all the darkness, along with the curse, evaporated and disappeared from the body of the demonic boar. The boy sighed heavily and moved on to the next action. He prepared the tastiest ingredients for his dish. The prey's meat was completely cleansed of the curse and gleamed with an appetizing shine. 3 wolves began to salivate at that appetizing part of the prey. They were delighted by Tenno. The boy approached the prey and saw. It resembled a boar, but was clearly a magical creature. He remembered his comrades, and for a moment thought that Bay also had magic. Hill was drooling over the delicious-looking boar, but Fenrir's sweet and silly look made the boy change his mind. He thought that they probably could not have any magical powers. They were just ordinary cute wolves, so Tenno decided that, most likely, he was mistaken. He saw how the wolves looked at the boar with appetite, thought that they would better start chewing the meat raw, which means he would have to cut the boar himself, and the boy was by no means pleased. Then he noticed one of the wolves looking at him with hope. Tenno had to tell Hio again that he would gladly eat the meat. Then he looked again at the gutted boar. The boy did not know where to start to begin skinning. Tenno tried to pull himself together. He needed time to think everything over. Meanwhile, to prevent the meat from spoiling, the boy had to freeze it. Tenno, thinking about freezing, remembered the high-quality strawberries in his refrigerator, bought with his salary. He felt sad that he would not taste them, so he used freezing magic on the prey. At that very moment, the entire huge body of the boar froze. Cold steam rose from the monster, and the wolves were stunned. They looked at the frozen meat with questions in their eyes. Tenno sighed with relief. He had dealt with the freezing, and now only needed to drain the internal fluids from the prey. As soon as this thought arose, a strong tremor seized him. His whole body shuddered with horror, and he realized he could not do it. And suddenly, he decided to resort to magic, to imagine that biological fluids were just water. But if he did that, the meat could dry out completely. So Tenno decided to use magic to check what was hidden in the opening. The view from inside the prey was unpleasant for Tenno. Because of this, the boy's legs buckled for a moment. Tenno fell on all fours. He was overcome by what he saw inside the boar. The animals were concerned about their master's actions. It seemed to them that he did not like the meat brought because he froze it, and they loved to bite into still warm meat. 3 wolves looked at the boy with a depressed expression. They were hurt because they could not serve him well. Tenno thought about how to drain the liquid from the meat, and the boy came up with the idea to cut the vessels near the organs. Then he decided to bring all the blood vessels outside and burn them. Tenno wanted to try. The boy tried to implement his plan by resorting to magic. One of the wolves thought that their master had no fangs, so he could not eat meat. Hiyoshin and Kuro wanted their master to command them just a word, and they would tear the meat for him. Meanwhile, Tenno used teleportation magic. At that very moment, all the prey's blood vessels were exposed. the three wolves immediately started salivating, seeing that appetizing sight. But to their horror, Tenno burned all the prey's blood vessels with magical flames. The Fenrils were stunned. They silently looked at their master, eyes wide open. Tenno noticed that the flames slightly scorched the meat on top. But the boy could instantly wipe it off with a brush. Now all that remained was to pull everything out from inside the channel and wash it thoroughly. Tenno had cut fish before, but he did not know which parts needed to be removed. During gutting, the boy began to mentally list all the internal organs of the fish. Because of this, he felt sick for a moment. The boy immediately stopped imagining the image of the organs, after which Tenno used teleportation magic. The dark-haired boy supported the man, raised his head, and strangely addressed them with a request for help. They arrived in the neighboring country Intura. The king of Intura, named Marut, listened to the subordinates' report, and not hiding his surprise, asked if they really had slave deserters from the empress. The king asked if they were not spies, right? They answered that the slave seal had lost its power, and Marut added that the slave seal, a symbol of that country's power, was genuine. The subordinate replied that the mages were currently busy with research. The slave who managed to escape told the doctor that they, like soldiers, went to scout the forest. Slave soldiers could not speak unless ordered. He continued to say that they were conscious, but everything always seemed distant to him, and suddenly at that moment, a white light flashed. Everything in his head immediately cleared up, and everyone instantly scattered. The doctor asked how long ago it happened. He replied that they had been wandering in the forest for more than a month. The king convened a council to discuss the slaves who came to their country today. Esmeralda said that in their country, thanks to the forest stretching between them and the emperor, they somehow managed to stop the aggressors' advance. Usually, they avoid the forest. He insisted that yes, it was true, and that was why they did not dare to intervene. The advisor cheerfully exclaimed that he proposed to investigate, because by finding out what caused this powerful slave symbol to disappear, they could find a way to counterattack. Esmeralda said, "Well said, amigo," but immediately added that he only wants to learn this magic. The man excitedly shouted that no, it is not so. The king said that it was good. The king looked out the window and asked what was really happening in the forest. Meanwhile, Akira was in the midst of grape harvesting in the forest. He happily said that the harvest was abundant. The boy smiled at the golems and told them to manage to gather the grapes before the heat rose, and Akira immediately got to work and skillfully arranged the bunches in the basket. The boy said that as soon as the temperature around his body dropped, he immediately felt better. Akira remembered the day when he almost caught heat stroke. He said sadly that he remembered nothing at all, and Koa gently pressed against his cheek. The boy felt that his body became much lighter, since then someone was always beside him, and he asked Koa to move back a little. The boy noticed the cunning look of the animals and loudly shouted that he understood what they wanted. They would not get any grapes. The animals simultaneously thought that they needed to be cared for. The wolf said that, in his opinion, the poor master was weakened by excessive use of magical power. The barrier is huge and requires a lot of magic. He felt that this magical power was coming from there. Koa told his friends that it was not only about quantity, but also about its incredible purity. Suri said that yes, he had never seen or heard of such magic. Karen said she was so fascinated watching this. The sudden loss of magical power could threaten life, so everyone thought it was a bad idea. He pressed his head to the boy's shoulder and happily said that it seemed his magical power had finally become stable. Akira, surprised, asked, "What are you doing now?" The boy looked at the grapes he had gathered himself and joyfully exclaimed that he could prepare so much until then he had not even thought about the luxury and pleasures that came with his main occupation. Akira smiled broadly and thought that the most important thing was sake. The boy put the grapes in a large box and said that he really liked beer, but there was no time to brew it. Akira rolled up his sleeves and shouted loudly that now they would make barrels. There was plenty of wood, so everything would work out. 6 hours passed, and the boy strangely thought that making a barrel was really that difficult. He concluded that probably the hard wood was to blamate bent poorly. It did not want to take shape, and when it seemed to him that they had gathered something, the water ruined everything. He thought tiredly that it was good. Akira shouted loudly that they were changing course. Koa asked with interest what the gentleman was doing today. The guy replied that first they needed to remove the bark and dry them. Suri said he did not know, but he really wanted to lick that honey that smelled so sweet. Koa hesitated and quietly said he did not consider it honey, and shouted for Koa to look. The golems were preparing today's dinner. Vovk said that he does not think this is dinner for today. Karen drooled and said that it smells quite interesting. Akira stretched out his hand and decisively said that he would saw the huge tree into 1-meter round discs. The boy said he would cut out barrel shapes using teleportation magic, and Akira joyfully exclaimed that magic is cool. Kuro stopped in front of rows of barrels along the wall, smiled, and said that probably the floor needs to be expanded, and Gollum stood nearby and rejoiced with him. The wizard knelt on one knee before the king, and the king extended his hand before him and suddenly shouted loudly. The emperor angrily exclaimed what it meant the magic stone could no longer be repaired. The wizard confessed with fear that they had tried several times, but nothing worked, and the one who repaired it seemed to have forgotten all memories and the magic itself. The king shouted loudly that it was a simple matter, which had been done many times before, and if there were not enough slaves, they could be forced to give birth. The emperor rushed to the throne, shouting that everything must start over right now, and the mage warned, if they do not find out the cause, the same thing will happen again. The king asked what happened to the wizards who tried to fix it. The wizards said they were in the room, and the emperor, enraged, ordered them to be killed. He did not care about useless people. The wizard looked back at the knights and, stunned, whispered, "How could this have happened?" The emperor sat on the throne and sternly ordered, "Quickly fix the magic stone, this is an order." The wizard answered fearfully that yes. The king cast an irritated glance at his courtiers and thought that it was annoying. They could not fix a simple crack. He was sure that something was missing. He continued that the lightning then was also strange. The king said that the culprit must be found. He thought that, interestingly, it was an attack from the other side. The man thought that they were preparing something to use the forest as cover. No country had the strength to oppose him. He shouted to the knights that enough of these senseless acts, it was time to calm the hearts. The slaves were lined up in a row right before the king. The man smiled and said that he had not been here for a long time. At such a time, first of all, sacrifices had to be made. He told the mage that after several hundred years of trying everything, he was tired of it, and now it was time to begin. All the commanders were also in the room. Ganalsi looked at the floor and wondered if he was ever destined to see this scene again. Full of hopes and ideals, he became a knight, and since then told the young that being the king's guard was a great honor. Gamels recalled his youth and felt that he would never get used to this spectacle, nor did he want to, but he had no strength to stop the king. The king shouted to the slaves to rejoice they would become part of his sword. The slaves smiled, but it was visible how they trembled. The king froze in place, raised the sword upward, and did not move. He tried to strike them, but the light deflected the sword aside. Gan Mills covered his face from the dazzling light. When everything calmed down, he shouted loudly that the enemy was advancing and that everyone must protect the king. He thought the enemy was nowhere to be seen. The dark-haired man grabbed the sword out of fear, then looked at the slaves and thought, what a strange feeling this is. The wizard shouted to the king that he was fine, and the king, in shock, thought that the wizard was now talking about why his sword was lying on the ground. The wizard touched the king, but he pushed his hand away. The king saw blood dripping from his hand. In shock, the king asked, "Why am I bleeding?" The wizard said excitedly that he would heal him. The king thought he had many obstacles. He said where his sword was. The sorcerer shouted to him, "Don't move." The emperor asked what that was. The dark-haired man, apologizing, asked only to look. The sorcerer replied that he did not mind, and the man took the sword in his hands and asked if this was the sinister magical sword. The man thought that he did not feel any power at all. It was just an old sword. Gon Mells asked what that rope was. It was just grass. The major added that he was not sure but thought it was like a joke wrapped around a magical stone. Gamels thought that the attack from the forest was related to this as if he himself had started it all. He lacked data, and when the investigation was completed, they would think about it. The sorcerer angrily shouted at the boy, "What are you doing here?" Gamnaldza asked what was wrong. The sorcerer replied that this was the master who forged the royal sword. He lost consciousness and woke up like this. The dark-haired man looked ahead, his eyebrows deeply furrowed, when suddenly a thought struck him. Gamels looked at the frightened youth and thought that it was the same thing that happened to the mage and the dead magical stone. Both times they tried to make a sacrifice. Many light-haired people stood silently. In a moment, they began to look at each other. Within a second, sparks pierced the air. The man continued to ponder that strange feeling he had experienced earlier. Gan Mills looked at the slaves who began to feel emotions and joyfully thought that perhaps they could stop the king. Jen Nilsi recalled how, in childhood, he read his great-grandfather's notes. It was dangerous there, as if the forests once looked different. A light breeze breathed, the trees swayed, and the forest bestowed blessings upon people. He continued to think that in childhood he was saved in the forest by beast people. When they even described the appearance of the forest kings, envy flared within him. Gamel thought that one day he wanted to see them, but in their country no one spoke about the forest. Gamel shouted to his subordinates, "Right now." Gamelzu approached him and asked if destruction was happening here. Right. The man replied that they began to meet in strange places. Gamelza said he did not want to come here, but still did. He asked if it did not seem that the mood was not very good. Right. Gamel loudly exclaimed that, of course, just now he had the chance to vent his anger in the forest. He was simply sent to rest. Now he cannot even kill slaves. Ganon also asked in surprise what exactly he meant. The knight told Gamel that because of what happened to the king, he probably better refrain from such actions at least for now. Gamel angrily exclaimed that he knew and wanted to lose patience, and Gun Milsa said that it seems recent events have had an impact, maybe it will come in handy. He and his subordinate approached the man. Gon Milsa thought that there were more important things to destroy now and told that man that he wanted to rent slaves. He opened the door and they went inside. Gon Milsa covered his nose with his hand and said that there was simply a terrible stench here. The slave overseer said he apologized and that the golem would clean thoroughly on cleaning day. He ordered the adult slaves to stand up. Gon Meals carefully examined the slaves and noticed a boy who was looking away. He told the manager that he was taking him. He selected a few more slaves. The manager nervously begged not to kill them after all. Slaves were scarce, so why not keep them, if possible, at least the women? Genmals angrily pondered whether there was a reason for that, then smiled and said he wanted to use them for a special mission and could mark them in case he needed to rent them again. Kiro and the wolf came to the farm, and the boy thought that this pleasant autumn had come so unexpectedly quickly. He looked at the gathered harvest and joyfully exclaimed that this was exactly what he had thought. Akira hugged his friends tightly and exclaimed with a smile that it was incredible they were all here, and he thought that this was the place he had seen from afar when he was previously expanding the borders. The boy smiled and said that it took 1.5 days. It was worth it. The wolf cheerfully asked what smelled so delicious, and Akira replied that he was glad to see their happy faces. The wolf said that this grass seemed tasty. I wanted to try it. The wolf laughed and said that, supposedly, the master would cook anything delicious. Kiro plucked a stalk and said that it looked like wheat. Isn't that where the grains come from? He bit it off and said that it was tasty, it could be eaten. The boy said that he used magic to hold the tip in place while cutting, and now they could gather everything together. All his friends immediately began helping him harvest. Kira smiled and said that it was good that there was grain in this world too. If all went well, he would be able to bake the pastry he dreamed of. The boy shouted that everyone should worry, so it was worth hurrying back. The wolf lay down on the ground and shouted that it would be faster that way. Akira happily thought that this was exactly what he had been thinking about. He asked excitedly if it was true that he could sit down. The wolf shouted that they were going home and immediately ran there, leaving the other animals behind. Kohler ran out of the house and happily shouted that he had been gone for almost 2 days. What happened? He was very worried. Akira covered his mouth with his hand so he wouldn't vomit after the fast trip. He said tiredly that he was already home. The wolf said happily that he thought so and rushed to return the master as soon as possible. Cow smiled and said that Hio did well with his task. Kiro thought that the road, which usually took more than a day, they covered in 3 hours and returned home. He was terribly tired after such a trip and would recover for a long time. The angry king shouted fiercely, "The 5th night companion's preparations are complete. Immediately proceed to suppress the village." It seemed someone was about to resist him. Gamel smiled and said he was waiting for these exact words would definitely lead the enemies into the sunlight. The king said he could take with him everything he needed. Gamel said that only mages and slaves are needed. The king smiled and said he has a plan. Fine, he can take as many as he wishes. The man left the throne room. The king laughed and thought that it should have been done earlier. He said that if it had been the 5th order of knights, they would have managed. The knight said he asked for forgiveness. A report came from the overseer of the slaves. The king smiled wickedly and said he could speak. He thought that yes, he should be feared. The knight said that it seems the behavior of some slaves has changed. The king asked in surprise what exactly these changes were, whether they were anomalies in the slaves' branding, and he was told no reports had been received about that. The king will say that the one who has changed must simply be killed. They can replenish what was lost. The knight said that this is good. The emperor said that he is curious who they will bring with them. In the next moment, all the boar's entrails instantly appeared outside. The wolves caught the appetizing smell, and saliva flowed again at the sight of the prey's innards. But at that very moment, the boy again used fire magic and burned all the boar's insides, and the wolves froze in horror once more. Tenno could not stand the stench. Although he cut off the unnecessary parts of the prey, both the smell and the sight disturbed him, so next time he decided to do everything with his eyes closed. The wolves froze. Then Tenno suddenly realized he could not only cool things down, but also burn them so he could try elemental magic. The boy was already about to cut the cloak and wanted the wolves to move away from him a little. Turning back to them, Tenno noticed that some were somewhat depressed. The boy began to cut the meat. He used air magic and sliced it with quick, sharp movements. The boar meat yielded easily to the knife and was cut into the parts he needed. All that remained was to cut the skin off the obtained piece. Tenno chose a certain piece of meat for himself. It needed to be cooked well so that it could be eaten. The boy then offered the rest of the prey to Cow and the others. Cow happily allowed those who brought it to choose their share first, and Xian, Kuro, and Hio enthusiastically rushed to the meat. And then a day-off named Chai approached King Fenrol. Chai asked Call that after the Fenrols divide the loot among themselves, he would get some too. Sao agreed to Chai's request to share the meat. Until he leaves the pack, they will do everything to help him. After all, at that moment they found themselves in the same position. Chai enthusiastically praised Cao. He really was a wise ruler. Then the king of the Fenrils reminded Chai that he himself was the king of Dalef. But T did not think so. How can he be called a king if he could not protect his comrades? It would be incredibly good if he managed to find those Dalefs who survived. The wolf reminded the Day Elf that he too received a name from Tenno. Now he would be called Chai. Chai rejoiced at this news. Suddenly someone shouted. It turned out that the boy had burned. His flesh was completely burned, and Tenno gloomily looked at his palms. Then the boy shyly asked one of the wolves to share a piece of meat with him. Tenno was upset about the lost piece of meat last time. He also burned the boar's entrails, so this time he would try to put the meat on a stone. So the boy with black hair tried to imagine the stone as a grill and very carefully used the magic of heat. Gradually the meat slowly began to fry on the stone. Its appetizing smell revealed itself in all its beauty, and Tenno rejoiced that the piece of meat did not burn from his magic. The wolves clung to the prey and devoured it. They bit the meat and enjoyed the meal. Suddenly an appetizing smell appeared in the air. This made the entire Fenhull herd freeze and stop eating the meat. They had never felt such an appetizing smell before, and in a moment they all found themselves right in front of the boy who was cooking his piece of meat. The meat looked fully cooked. Appetizing steam rose from the plate. Tenno was glad putting the meat on the stone turned out to be the right decision. The meat was already well cooked. Meanwhile, the wolves were looking at that tasty piece of meat, drooling. Then the boy stopped frying the meat and grabbed a wooden stick with a sharpened end. Firmly skewering the cooked meat on the spit, it was still hot from the heat after grilling. Although he tried to grill it well, it was still a bit tough. Then Tenno noticed that the dish was slightly burnt, but he was not upset. The boy wanted to taste it as soon as possible. Having tasted the prepared meat, Tenno pleasantly noticed that it was incredibly delicious and rejoiced that he was able to satisfy his hunger. So the boy took up the food again. Tenno tried to refuse the bird because it was forbidden to eat it. Not far from the company, a cave was visible. Dark energy hovered in this cave. Due to the moisture, drops of water dripped onto the floor. Someone silently listened to the noise coming from outside. Meanwhile, Tenno froze in surprise. His little bird turned out to be a mammal and effortlessly ate wild boar meat. Having eaten to their fill, the boy and the group of animals set out to explore the new place to make sure it was safe. In the cave both above and below, Tenno found no problems. He also did not notice any sign of life. Tenno decided to arrange the main room at the very top of this cave. Compared to the previous dwelling, this place was like a 4-story villa. They were on the lower floor of the cave, and the boy was delighted. The place was spacious, and the ceiling in the room was very high. The boy noticed that there would be even more space ahead. He became curious about what was shining on the wall in the distance, but he did not feel the presence of living beings. This floor was also quiet, but Tenno was only worried about the lower floor. When he checked again with his clairvoyance, it seemed to him that something was there. Tenno instantly became serious. He was worried about how much longer the barrier he had cast earlier would hold. Although he had cast the spell, it seemed to him that the darkness would return sooner or later. The boy sighed wearily. In any case, he first needed to check what was happening below. Tenno did not really want to go down. Out of sadness, he hugged Cao. Cao tried to calm the boy, and Tenno, glad for the support, thanked the silver wolf. He felt better, and having calmed down, he headed to the lower floor. The boy, together with the pack of wolves, was tense as they descended, and Tenno walked carefully all the time so as not to trip over the stones. Finally, they reached the lower floor of the cave. Cao, sensing something, immediately showed his grin. Before them unfolded a dense darkness. Tenno froze at the sight. Even after his powerful cleansing, there was still so much cursed dark energy swirling here that Fenarol growled at the sight of this darkness. The pack of wolves and the boy watched tensely at the dark cluster of energy. From it began to emerge a smaller cluster of dark energy. But suddenly, to everyone's surprise, it sharply lunged toward them. The Fennels immediately growled, trying to protect their master, and the frightened Tenno instantly uttered a cleansing spell. But the darkness did not disappear. The dark energy tried with force to break through the protective barrier, and the boy saw that the barrier reacted. For a moment, it seemed to him that his cleansing magic had not worked. But at that moment, the dark energy instantly melted away. Tenno froze from this. Then there was a dull thud in the room. Something fell. The boy still could not believe that his cleaning magic had worked, albeit late. And now the dark energy cluster was gone. The black-haired boy, turning his head in all directions, searched tensely for something. Because the same thing happened to Karen, so he thought that someone might appear from the darkness. Tenno looked down and saw a spider. The boy crouched down to the floor to get a better look at the spider, and Tenno watched him with admiration. Like a spider but with wings, the boy noticed a dark cloud of energy nearby, and Tenno immediately used his cleansing magic. At that moment, the cleansing magic dispersed the dark energy. The spider froze in amazement. A human could destroy darkness. The boy noticed that the dark energy was desperately trying to break free from beneath the ground. During the cleansing, the darkness began to evaporate from the room. And finally, from the dark mass crawled out one giant spider with 20 little ones. Tenno was surprised. In this world, beetles were considered magical monsters, although a spider could not be called that. But they had wings, so maybe they weren't spiders after all. Tenno immersed himself in thought he could not find an answer to this question. Suddenly, the silver wolf lunged straight at the magical spiders. Cow noticed that only one large representative of this species remained alive. Tenno looked at Cow in surprise. Then the winged spider flapped its wings and flew upward, heading straight for the black-haired boy. This momentarily frightened Tenno. The winged spider flew up and landed right on the crown of the boy's head. Tenno, although uneasy, did not shoo it away from his head. Meanwhile, the little spiders also crawled forward. They easily jumped onto one of the wolves, and Xian froze, seeing the spiders climbing on his fur. The black wolf, twisting in all directions, tried to shake off the little spiderlings. Tenno was amazed, but the boy realized that, it seemed, they were not enemies to each other. After some time, they had already reached the second floor, and the boy noticed that it was quite spacious here too, only the corners of the room remained to be checked. Tenno remembered that earlier he had simply cast a spell, and it had already worked, although he had no idea what it was. He recalled his sister's voice. When you create magic, there must be an image in your head, but in practice, it turned out to be quite different. The boy decided to test his theory again. He tried to summon fire, but did not imagine it in his head, but nothing happened. The flame did not appear on his palm. Tenno tried again to imagine the void, but this time he summoned water with magic, and a splash sounded in an instant. Behind the boy lay a puddle, and Tenno, seeing it, immediately remembered it. After thinking a little, he tried to imagine the image of what he wanted to summon, and in a moment a flame appeared on his palm. The wolves froze. Their master was burning, and Tenno did not understand how this was different from when he summoned water, so he called fire again. Suddenly fire flared up, and the boy noticed. The flame, most likely thanks to the new magic, could be made to hover in the air. You just need to imagine a clear image. If the image and the spell connected even once, they were stored in his head. It was enough just to say the words, and the elements appeared. This was very convenient because Tenno got incredibly tired from constant concentration. Suddenly the flame shifted to the side. The boy with black hair noticed this. Tenno realized that wind was blowing from the crack, and so the fire changed direction. Tenno pressed to the crevice and peered inside tensely. Although it was wide, there was no dark energy there, so he saw nothing. At that moment he thought to illuminate the crack with a fireball, but when he did so, the flame lit everything too brightly, and everyone was momentarily blinded by this dazzling light. Tenno realized he had overdone the lighting a bit. He was touched by the wolves' sweet gesture of covering their eyes, and the boy smiled, apologizing to them. He tried with all his might to reduce the fireball. This time it became too small, and Tenno had to illuminate it a little again. After the boy did this, he wearily fell to the floor. Using precise magic, Tenno became increasingly tired. Then the boy noticed that the wolves around were looking at them with admiration and anxiety. After a short rest, Tenno looked into the crack in the glow of the fireball inside. Small stones were flickering. Suddenly a winged spider rose up, flew straight into the crack, grabbed a small sparkling stone and flew back. The spider flew up, climbed onto the boy's palm, and placed the shiny stone right on it. Tenno was delighted by the beauty of the silver stone. He sincerely thanked the winged spider for bringing him the shiny stone. Tenno even called it the leader of the spiders. The spider silently looked at the boy. Then it shyly hid in Tenno's hair, and the boy watched this with surprise, and somehow it happened that he called it the head of the spiders. Suddenly the boy noticed that the wolves were intently looking at the crystal in his palm. It seemed to him that it was a rare stone, and although it was beautiful, now was not the time to use it, so Tenno put it in his pocket. The boy wondered if there might be something just as shiny on the upper floors as this stone, but decided to postpone this matter for later. The fennels froze in surprise. Tenno could look at the miserals so calmly. After checking, the boy realized that there were no other cracks or fissures, and with that, the inspection of the mountain was completed. After some time, the boy looked into the bag and saw only a wallet and a few papers. Tenno was upset. He thought he would find something useful, and his phone was already lost somewhere. Having examined the new home, Tenno planned to look for other people and still had to find something to sleep on. If he slept on the floor, his body would hurt. Tenno needed to find something soft and smooth. Then the boy looked at something in surprise. It turned out that with his magic, he was able to polish the floor. A pack of wolves looked at this with surprise. Tenno was momentarily embarrassed by their attention, then enthusiastically smoothed the walls and floor. The fenrils froze at what they saw. Their master was incredible. Magic managed to turn a solid mountain into this, and Cow happily praised the boy. This will be his place to sleep. But others outran him and rushed in that direction. The floor was too slippery, so the walls slipped and almost collapsed. Tenno looked at this embarrassed. Kao was ashamed he had embarrassed himself. Precise magic is truly a difficult thing. Dark energy tried to break through the barrier, but it perfectly fulfilled its protective, Rolianly repelling the strikes of darkness, while the winged spider watched from afar. They are the masters of hellfire. Spiders with wings firmly withstood the flames. Emerging from the bowels of the earth, they dragged their prey into the lava. Their clan kept everyone in fear. Everyone who saw them was doomed to destruction. The winged spiders were formerly called the guardians of the destruction of Tujiani. Only one adult representative of this species survived. At that moment, they were just little spiders with wings. This was their reduced form. To protect their children, they spent almost all their magical power sand, miraculously survived in such a state. The spider with wings could not understand why, under the influence of powerful magic, he did not disappear, and suddenly someone shouted at him, calling him Tijarini. That was the king of Fennel. The silver wolf realized that it was indeed Tyrania. He smirked and told the spider that it had become much smaller than before. Fennel's words irritated Tyrania. Jarini terribly wanted to find out what had happened. The smell of evil magic spread throughout the forest, and now it had disappeared somewhere. Spider also could not calm down. Was Tenno really a human? Fenneral agreed. Tenno is a human, but it was the power of this human that saved them all. The TRNA did not believe it after all. The forest was destroyed by humans. Instead, Tenno's magic was completely different, so their clan unanimously decided to proclaim him a master, and Spider was surprised because they were proud Fenrils. Then Kao told Tironi that although they had never been enemies with them, if they decided to attack their master, a terrible roar echoed through the forest. Spider did not even hesitate. Even if he were 100 times stronger, the boy was still stronger, and it immediately became clear. His magic is good and restores everything. Kao instantly calmed down, but that did not mean that Fenhul would stop being the master of the forest. Kao's words irritated Chirini. Kao joked, then he told Jeremy to make his puppies stop tormenting Dalef. After being defeated, he trembled and was depressed. Chirini was surprised that Dalef was called Chi, and Fenril happily explained to him that their master gave them names from now on. Terini must call him Koa. Kao was proud of this name, and Jereni, remembering that the boy had previously called him Spider, also shyly rejoiced. Then Spider asked Koa about that lightning, and Koa felt incredibly eerie magic. He thought that somewhere humans had started a fight again, so the master set a barrier. Spider was shocked that this boy created the barrier himself, and how tall. At this pace, he should have already fallen from exhaustion. Kao herself would not have lasted so long, but the master was fine. Spider could not believe it. Tenno was thinking hard about something. Tenno realized that there was not a soul here. A few days ago, he launched a drone for reconnaissance, but all around was only endless forest thicket. The forest was quite large. The boy met many animals, but there was not a single house here. Wherever he looked, there was only forest everywhere. For a moment, Tenno thought as if there was not a soul left in this world. The boy tried to push this thought away. After all, there were still places he had not explored. After some time, he calmed down. His mood improved when he tidied up the dwelling. After training, he managed to make a proper floor and walls. Tenno also made stairs between floors, and thanks to this honed his movements. From the outside, the mountain looked quite ordinary, but inside passages stretched from top to bottom, and now there was a real villa. The residential complex had 4 floors and 2 basements. On the 4th was his bedroom. The first basement was equipped as a food storage, and in the second hid a cave with stones. Unfortunately, no one would understand his efforts. The wolves, cheerfully wagging their tails, patiently waited for praise from the boy. They brought food. Tenno chose a piece of meat, and with the help of movement magic, teleported it onto a wooden board. The fennel pack then began to eat the rest of the prey. Recently, they competed over who would eat the entrails of the prey. The boy realized that the Inuit and animals ate raw meat, so he should not have fried the food. Tenno remembered how the wolves eagerly grabbed the entrails of the prey and ran away from the boy so he wouldn't have time to burn the food. Tenno fried the meat, but the boy was already tired of eating it every day and passionately dreamed of fish. Suddenly, his attention was drawn by a silver wolf. Cow stopped eating the prey and tensely looked to the side. The silver wolf was looking at something with a sinister smile. A threatening roar burst from his jaws. The boy was worried because the cow had changed. When he approached the wolf, he realized the dark energy had managed to break through the barrier. The boy noticed that the spiders were already on alert, and the wolves were tense and waiting for an attack from the darkness. Tenno was boiling with rage over this situation. He remembered that lightning had appeared on the barrier since the night. The boy was very irritated and stunned by his master's angry shot. He looked at his master with fear. Tenno tried to compose himself, then, calming down, the boy looked down from the top of the mountain. Using magic, he launched a drone, and a view of a forest area appeared on the screen. Tenno noticed that part of the forest had already been captured. Yesterday, looking back, he noticed a lake behind the barrier. The boy found its exact location. Then he decided to try to cleanse the entire vicinity and strengthen the barrier even more. Cal froze at his master's intention, but Tenno would never know if he could unless he tried. Having set up the house, he was already used to using magic. In his mind, there was only one image, a strip stretching all the way to the lake. Although it was far, Tenno felt he could do it. The boy then released cleansing magic directly into the very source of darkness. The king of Fennel was stunned and worried his master was using too much magic. The boy did not stop. He wanted to stretch the ribbon in all directions so that it would reach the depths of the earth, thus destroying the darkness that had appeared. The next moment, the boy cast a spell to strengthen the barrier and cleanse it. Fenrir watched with admiration, and bright light enveloped the space and destroyed the dark energy. Soon the darkness dissipated over the land, and Tenno rejoiced in his success. He managed to strengthen the barrier tenfold. He did not feel tired, he even felt better. The spider with wings said that Tenno truly was an inexhaustible source of magic. They would never be able to defeat him. Cal agreed with this. The boy noticed that the curse had seeped into the water and could spread throughout the area, so he had to place a barrier there in the form of a filter. For the safety of Tenno, he wanted to install a 3-layer water filter. The cow was stunned. The boy still had strength. After this, Tenno realized that somewhere there was someone who cast all these curses. Until they completely disappeared, he decided to cleanse the land from them daily. The boy smiled and told the silver wolf that they would go fishing the next day. Meanwhile, in the Inspira castle, Spears was under guard. A black-haired man looked out the window. The street was still calm, but suddenly Jen Milsey shouted his name. It turned out to be the commander of the Knights of the 4th Squad, Esperanza Miserost. Gan Mills commanded the 1st Squad. He noticed that Miserost returned earlier. His task became easy. There was nothing special in the forest. Only from time to time, as always, monsters appeared, and Miserost was not worried about safety. This country was protected by the strongest barrier. But Gonmils was no longer so calm. He was somewhat disturbed by the light that appeared in the forest. A few days ago, a beam of light appeared in the very center of the forest, spreading in all directions. Using a magic stone, the king decided to check if this power really came from the lord of the forest. Since their birth, no one had noticed such changes, and they also did not know if the king had any supporters. Ganmils was surprised he was still so strong. Miserost fell silent for a moment at his words. Then he awkwardly reported that because of this, there were more people in reconnaissance, but that man saw no reason for concern. With the power of their king and mages, they could attack other kingdoms for centuries. All they needed was to believe in the king and fight for him. Moreover, a powerful barrier protects from monsters outside, and the knights could also defend the country. Mizros then said goodbye to Ganmilza. The man wanted to take a bath as soon as possible, but Ganmilza was still uneasy. The heart of the world and the forest under the power of the magic of the two-faced eye. Its control is exercised by a magical stone that has emitted an incredible amount of magic since ancient times, and many mages suffered trying to study it. Thanks to this, the king and the mages were able to stop aging. The research had been going on for hundreds of years, and although they aged, it was very slowly. When Ganels was a child, he thought little about this. Their country could only rule thanks to that stone. On the way, he came across a crowd of a beast race on the street. They dragged themselves on the ground with empty eyes and looked very miserable. They had a mark on the back of their heads by which they were controlled. Gan Milsey, deep in thought, reached this place. Behind the representatives of the beast race stood an evil old man with a whip. He did not even consider them human and urged them on with the same whip. Jen Milsey asked the old man why they so rarely saw so many prisoners. The leader instantly came to his senses and looked at him with respect. Gan Mills was just passing by when the old man smiled and told him that the number of captives had recently decreased significantly, all because of the sacrifices. And fortunately for the old man, the number of victims is planned to be increased even more. Hearing this, Gunmulza was by no means pleased. Suddenly, the commander of the 5th Squad, Gamel, approached them among all the commanders. He was the most obsessed with battle. Gan Meals disliked him very much, but noticed that he had a new sword. It turned out that the king had given Gamel a new sword the same as their rulers, and it had powerful magic. Genel had just come to test it on the prisoners. The sword could completely suck the liquid from the body, and Genel, let's say, wanted to kill him. Gamel had already approached the crowd of prisoners. The old man anxiously told him that they were specially selected for the ritual, but Gamel didn't care. The man had already swung his sword, and with one move destroyed the prisoners. Then Gamel laughed loudly, enjoying this feeling, and the old man could only helplessly endure his actions. Gamal was bored. The prisoners of Nika did not even resist his attacks. Suddenly, a sorcerer approached him. He explained to the man that to draw the sword, one must activate the skill. At that moment, Gamal became interested. Gunmils watched this scene in horror. He realized that this country had gone mad. It was already daylight outside. The boy was focused on tying some object to the rope. Soon his fishing rod was ready, although it was not a fishing line it had to do. Kel looked inquisitively at his actions. Then the silver wolf sneaked up to the boy. Tenno explained to him that he was putting meat on the line. Then the boy swung the fishing rod. He smiled at Cow and said that when the fish is on the hook it can be caught, and meanwhile Kuro had already grabbed the meat hanging on the rope. Kuro was eating the piece of meat with relish. The boy anxiously said that he was not allowed to eat that. Dion also wanted meat. Later they headed to a place by the water, and the boy quietly hoped that there would be fish there. But he was met with disappointment. The lake was completely polluted, so the chances of there being fish were extremely low. Tenno was depressed by this. He had walked so long to this place that he hadn't even thought about it. Then the boy got angry and cast purification magic over the lake. Frowning, he stretched out his palm to the water and performed purification magic, but its power turned out to be too weak. The curse did not disappear. All his previous attempts at purification proved futile. Tenno knew that cleansing the water of the curse would be much more difficult. Then he built a barrier over the water. The boy decided to isolate the lake from all sides, even from the depths of the earth, and then he came up with an idea on how to effectively purify the water. Tenno could definitely stop the curse from spreading through the air, but the boy did not know how to separate the water to extract only the curse itself. Nothing came to his mind, and the boy despairingly wondered how to solve the problem of purifying the water. He tried to imagine the curse as dirt, but it was not that. The boy thoughtfully stroked the cow's fur, and suddenly he was struck by a stunning idea. The boy wanted to imagine the curse in the water as dirt, and the magic of purification as a magnet that attracts this dirt. After that, Tenno wanted to immediately try his idea. He imagined as if with a magnet he was pulling everything from the bottom of the lake. Tenno applied absorption magic, and it worked. The darkness began to gather in certain places. Suddenly Tenno's joy disappeared. He was overwhelmed with disgust at the sight of the clusters of darkness. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Inspiration, knights stood guard at the entrance. The wizard entered the room. The head of the mages was asked about the stone, since yesterday he had been troubled by a strange pressure from the stone, and it would be good if it were not so. Suddenly the head of the mages noticed a small crack in the stone. Tenno teleported the curse upwards. He managed to gather the darkness. The wolves looked on in shock. Now the boy wanted to try to direct it to where he had recently sent the curse. Combining it with a particle of the atmosphere, Tenno imagined as if returning the evil to its place. At that moment the darkness dispersed somewhere. Everyone looked at this scene in surprise. Finally, the lake was completely cleansed of the curse. Tenno could not believe his eyes. Looking at the purified lake, clear transparent water was already flowing like a river, and it only remained to wait a little until living creatures returned to the lake. They happily left this place, and meanwhile the head of the mages, trying to transform the house, froze because the stone suddenly shone so brightly that the dazzling light blinded them for a moment. When the man came to his senses, he was horrified. Their devilish stone had an even bigger crack. In the throne hall, news about the kingdom was being poured to the king, but he was bored. He only needed to know what was happening in the forest. The king impatiently wanted to find out what happened to the barrier in the forest after there were more victims yesterday. He hoped that the forest had fallen, and the king of the forest was also destroyed. After that, all those who remained would simply have to be exterminated for the welfare of their country. The dark, bloodthirsty face of the king frightened his servant. Suddenly night flew into the throne hall. He reported that something bad had happened. A crack appeared on the magic stone. The servant asked the knight, because in this room was the most powerful barrier in the whole country. Maybe the knight imagined everything. There were no problems with the barrier, but when the room was suddenly flooded with dazzling light, the stone cracked, and the king, hearing this, became angry. The man used magic and destroyed the knight who brought him the news. The knight did not even have time to understand what happened before he was gone. The officials instantly tensed from this scene. Gonmilza was terribly shocked by this unthinkable spectacle, and almost everyone felt it was better not to stick out. If someone tried to give advice, they would probably be eliminated. The commander of the 5th squad looked at the dead knight with a smile, and in it was the truth of pleasure. Then the king called the commander of the 4th squad of knights. Miserost immediately responded to the king's call, and the gloomy man ordered him to go to the forest immediately and find out the reason. Carol and the cow instantly ran away when they saw the water rising. Karen flew forward to make sure nothing bad happened to her. Suddenly, the water rolled back into the lake. Kira fell to the ground and shouted joyfully that it had stopped. He thought that now they were finishing building the house. The boy entered the house along with the animals that fell asleep. He looked out the window of his future home. Cow sat next to him, and Karen, as always, settled on his shoulder. Akira decided to bake meat in the oven. The wolf watched the meat with admiration. Akira smiled and told his friend that the stove was ready and cooking would become easier. Although for now it was only suitable for frying meat, the first floor was made into a kitchen and dining room so that everyone could fit. The boy looked out the window and said with a smile that the view from the veranda was simply wonderful. Cow happily added that they also wanted to try the roasted meat. The boy took a piece of meat and said that it was tasty but not cooked enough yet. Akira blew on the meat to cool it down a bit. He threw the meat to the wolf and asked him to hold it. Kuro tried it and beamed with happiness. He felt so good. The other wolves rushed to circle around the boy and made noise, asking the owner to let them try too. It was unfair that only Cow was trying. Kira bent down to them and awkwardly replied that it was okay, but only a little. The boy felt someone's gaze on him. It was Chai, who was looking at him attentively. Kira called him closer. The wolf approached, and the boy smiled and said that he had always kept to himself. They were friends, so he could also get a piece of meat. He happily asked if he could take something too. Hio exclaimed that if the owner gave it to him, then it was allowed. Shin loudly said that if he ate now, next time he would be able to eat eagerly. He excitedly said that he could and, of course, would eat. The wolves gathered in a circle and began devouring the roasted meat that Akira had prepared. The boy thought that their lunches lately looked exactly like this, and Akira added with an awkward smile that next time they needed to roast more. Akira thought that, among other things, he now had a bathroom. He went there and joyfully exclaimed that he felt so good the bath was simply incredible. The boy smiled and said that being able to create water and heat it effortlessly magic is just cool. Before that, he somehow managed with cleaning magic, but the bath was still much better. Akira continued to insist that he washed without soap and therefore could not do without magic. He lacked many things, so he made a huge bath so everyone could wash. He kept thinking that lately they seemed to have gained weight, although now they could fit in the bath. His next wish was to get a toilet. The boy created it and hugged it tightly. He cried and said that they finally met, and every time he wanted to be alone, Kola would run out shouting that it was dangerous for the master to be alone in the forest. Kira tried to push him away, and he awkwardly replied that no, everything was fine. He did not need to go there. It was not easy for him to explain to the wolf why he should be left alone. The boy smiled and said that now this problem would disappear. At first, he was afraid that nothing like that would come out of the stone, but it even looked like a regular toilet. Koa sat next to the room and heard Akira joyfully exclaiming that it was simply incredible. There was even a built-in bidet. Magic was so cool, and there was also an automatic cleaning system. The wolf ran into the room and joyfully asked what the master was doing here. The boy screamed in fear. The wolf left the room with a very strange expression on his face. The friend asked what happened, and Koa said in shock that now he thought the master hated him because he had seen him in such an indecent state. Akira came out of the room and awkwardly said that they needed to make doors. He thought that he got too carried away and probably made a toilet on every floor. Practicing magic, he created a bunch of different things. The boy took the magic stone and said that it was still harder to practice with the silver crystal. He pulled it in different directions and shouted in surprise that it was stretching. Kira pulled even harder and said he would try to stretch it as much as possible. Koa did not believe that Miserol had succumbed to magic. It was incredible. The boy stopped, looked through the stone, and said with admiration that it let light through and was very similar to glass, and Akira went home to check it. He inserted the glass into the window frame and sat on the windowsill. Smiling, he said he really liked it. Akira thought the glass was thin and strong, as if someone had tried to carve windows directly into the rock. The boy decided to walk around the house. He smiled, thinking he had gone a bit far and made windows on every floor. Akira cheerfully said that later he wanted to make wooden floors. There was plenty of material here. Kirill went into the forest, stopped in front of a tall tree, and said it looked the biggest and straightest. On TV, they said the tree needed to be dried before using it. How many years old was this tree? The boy shouted loudly that it was time to get to work. First, he needed to get rid of the branches and bark. Akira did this with his magic, which worked incredibly fast. He said that after this, he only had to dry it. Akira looked at the perfect tree without branches and joyfully exclaimed that it turned out just wonderful, and immediately the magic of the wind came alive. Akira joyfully exclaimed that it was ready, but awkwardly thought he had forgotten to cut off the root. The boy looked at the boards growing out of the ground. He said angrily that next time the tree would have to be cut down first, but for now he would teleport to the house. A whole pile of boards appeared near his house. Akira said that now he needed to trim shorter and gather everything together. The boy loudly exclaimed that now he asked to start teleporting to the 4th floor to the bedroom. He entered the room and proudly looked at the boards he had made with his own hands. Akira rolled up his sleeves and confidently exclaimed that now it was time to get to the floors in the house. Akira imagined the perfect floor where each board lay as if by a ruler and shone, and thought that laying the floor was simple. Just lay the boards and that's it. The boy said irritably that at least he thought so. Akira carefully stepped onto the floor and thought that the gaps appeared immediately and the boards were of different thicknesses. Akira kept thinking that the boards themselves were huge and heavy. He could not lay them flat by teleportation, and this upset him greatly. He sighed irritably and said that everything was going wrong compared to what he had imagined, and that, if you think about it, not following the rules would ruin the floor. Akira laid down several boards and sat on them, looked at the pile and said tiredly that there was still so much to do, while Koa climbed onto the windowsill and watched his owner with interest. The boy went down and said he needed to catch his breath. He picked up a stone and returned to Koa, sat on the windowsill, and the wolf went down to the floor and continued watching. Kira looked at the stone and said it would be good to get some good knives soon. He will try to make them from these hard silvery stones. The boy stretched it and said it had become even thinner. Akira looked at the finished product and joyfully said that everything was simply wonderful. The shape came out exactly as it should. The boy approached the stone and shouted that he had to try it. He stuck in the knife and happily exclaimed what a cool thing it was, but the stone itself was not strong. One had to be careful with the blades. Kira smiled, looked at the molten stone, and said it was interesting, but the shape of such stones is easily changed by magic. Koa and Karen listened to the boy with interest. He smiled and asked what could turn him into a pot. Akira began stretching the material. The boy said he would like some other food, not meat. Kiro kept saying that later he would need kitchen utensils and door hinges, ventilation for the windows, and also an exit to the fourth floor. The boy Akira looked at the doll he made himself and happily exclaimed that it turned out so cute. Hadn't molded clay for a long time, and it was so much fun. Kola yawned loudly from boredom. Akira lined up 3 dolls in a row. He picked up a pebble and examined it carefully. The boy thoughtfully said that the pebble itself sparkled. He would make the eyes more radiant. Kuro made another doll and placed it next to the others. He picked up the next stone, smiled, and thought he would make a few more. It was so much fun for him. Night fell, everyone went to sleep, and the dolls remained standing on the windowsill. In the morning, Akira woke up and groaned sleepily, noticing how Koa was getting up from his place. The boy barely raised his voice and tiredly whispered good morning to him, but asked to be allowed to sleep a little longer. Akira noticed that the floor was laid perfectly and shouted in surprise. He could not understand who had done it. The floor was laid so perfectly that it simply shone. Akira heard someone say that the entire floor needed to be finished immediately. The boy turned his head and saw the dolls pulling a board. They moved remarkably in unison, and they even had a commander who was directing them. The dolls carefully measured the length of the board, and as soon as something did not fit, one of them cut off the excess with a knife that Akira had made earlier. This resulted in a perfect layout. The wolves looked at the new inhabitants, then with interest at Akira. The boy looked away from Koa's face and awkwardly said that he did not know how it happened, but there turned out to be 9 of them. Kira hesitantly asked, "What are these dolls that he made yesterday?" "Yes, why are they moving?" "The dolls went for a new board to finish the work in this house." The boy awkwardly whispered that he remembered making them. He recalled the story about gnomes who helped make shoes. Before going to sleep, he thought it would be good to finish the floors. He was shocked to realize that it was all because of his thoughts. Akira opened the door to another room and said that one more was missing. The boy noticed another doll sitting alone on the windowsill. Akira picked it up and said sadly that he himself did not remember when he made it. Then the boy returned to the other dolls who were carrying boards. The boy shouted loudly for them to stop working. He announced a general meeting. The dolls instantly rushed to him, lined up in a row, and began waiting for Akira's command. The boy awkwardly said that they were listening to the order. The dolls watched him intently. Akira looked tensely at the doll in his hand and placed it next to the others. He confidently told the doll that she was a helper robot and now had to move. The doll stood up and approached her friends. She cheerfully began waving her hands. The boy smiled and thought that he was alive. This is how it moves. Akira told the doll that he relied on her. The dolls scattered in different directions to continue working. Akira cheerfully exclaimed, "Wonderful, they work quickly, beautifully, and efficiently. It's easier for him this way, and they are so cute." The wolves sat behind the boy, frightened. The wolves howled hysterically, saying that these were golems, the same ones they had seen earlier in the forest, which people use for war, and Koa growled loudly for them to calm down. The doll stepped out to the wolf and tried to touch him. The wolf stepped back from her, frightened. Akira said, smiling, that she was so cute. He thought that for some reason the wolves were afraid of the clay people and hoped that soon they would live in peace. Akira happily thought that the dolls had already managed to lay 23 boards. Now that they had kindly taken on this work, he could go explore the forest again. He and his friends went outside. The wolves howled joyfully that they were going hunting and would get a lot of meat. Akira smiled and waved goodbye to them. Koa stayed beside him. Akira told him and Karen that they were now going to look for vegetables and spices. They went deep into the forest. The boy asked, because a doubt troubled him. Were they going further away from the mountains? There was still a curse there. Akira decided that he would clean up on the way. The boy looked up at the sky and thought that the source of the curse remained where the light broke through, and what to do if it returned again and again. Akira sighed angrily and thought, well, fine, that's his problem. The boy smiled and told his friends that the forest had become much more beautiful than when he first came here. The boy asked Koi with curiosity what he thought about it. Akira raised his head and sighed in surprise. He exclaimed joyfully that these were fruits. He had just seen them. Akira exclaimed that it was cool and they could be eaten. The boy touched the tree and sadly said that he couldn't climb it. He was so upset because they had been searching for so long, and now here you are. Suddenly a spider jumped out. Akira looked at it in surprise and joyfully exclaimed that the spider can crawl. Then other spiders began to appear one after another. Akira asked in shock what was happening now there were 8 of them. The boy awkwardly thought that, if you looked closely, they had no wings. Could these really be babies? He kept thinking to himself, not even a week has passed since their first meeting, and they are already growing up so faster. Is it just his imagination? Akira thought that he must be imagining it, or Ko had also grown almost up to 2 meters. Suddenly the fruit fell to the ground, and the boy happily exclaimed that he could climb on it. He picked it up and looked at it carefully. Akira said they could still be eaten. Bright red, probably sweet. It seems animals eat them. The boy cut the fruit and looked excitedly at the pulp. It looked so tasty. Akira took a bite and exclaimed. He shouted happily that it was so delicious. The boy wiped his tears and said that he hadn't eaten fruit for a long time and was very happy the fruit was crunchy and tasted like a peach, ripe and sweet. He gave some to the spiders and birds and did not forget about Koa. They gathered a whole mountain of fruits. Akira happily looked at the fragrant fruits. Koa hesitantly noticed that it seemed they had gone a bit overboard. The boy asked what they would do with them now. He tried to stuff it into the fruit and said the bag barely fits one, and Akira wearily thought it would become like Pac-Man's mout hand. Suddenly, his words transformed the bag. He stuffed all the fruits into the bag, and the bag still remained small. Akira happily thought that all 30 pieces fit. Magic is an unpredictable thing, he laughed awkwardly. They moved on and came across some cabbage. They gathered a little. Meanwhile, the wolves were chasing boars towards the boy. They tried their best to be helpful to Akira. The boy shouted loudly that they had returned. The wolf also shouted that they had returned. Akira shouted joyfully, noticing that today they had hunted well. He asked with interest if they were not wounded. The wolf shouted joyfully so that the master would see how much meat he and So had brought. Akira petted the wolf and exclaimed that he saw everything now, everything is clean. Akira turned the bag upside down and poured out all the fruits and vegetables. The boy awkwardly admitted that he himself did not expect so much, and Valky was curiously examining the new products. The boy happily thought that even without salt, all of this could wonderfully diversify the diet. Akira took off his jacket and joyfully exclaimed that it was time to get to work. He said first you need to clean the blood, then cut with a knife, and then open with air magic. Akira tore a hole and carefully began cutting into pieces. He placed pieces of meat on the ground and loudly told the wolves they could help themselves. Akira pointed to the horribly stinking pieces of boar and said that there were entrails there if they wanted, they could take them. The boy thought he had divided all the meat, leaving some to eat now and putting some aside for later. The wolf happily told his friend that the meat the owner had cut was simply wonderful and very convenient to eat. He gladly replied that he had eaten enough liver. Akira looked at the meat carcasses and wearily said that it was getting cramped in front of the house. As soon as salt appears, it will be necessary to make ham and also learn to tan leather. Akira put the meat in the refrigerator and smiled as if he had set up a cold chamber on the lowest floor. Fruits and vegetables are probably better not stored here. He will think about it later. Karen was practically drooling over the grilled meat. Akira approached her and smiled, saying he had to thank her for watching over it. It seemed she liked the grilled meat itself even more. Karen chirped and Akira said he was already well toasted. By the way, even raw this vegetable is sweet, somewhat like something between cabbage and lettuce, and soft inside. The boy took the fruit and the knife, began to cut and said with enthusiasm that the fruit was bright green with a refreshingly slightly sour aroma, and if you sprinkle a little of its juice on fried meat. Akira wrapped the meat in a cabbage leaf and happily began to eat. Smiling, he exclaimed that this was true bliss. The vegetables were so sweet and juicy, and the slight acidity was simply incredible. The boy said he would like to say that it was tasty. Although in reality it was just ordinary meat, it still really begged for sauce. By the way, everyone except Karen had grown a couple of sizes bigger, and he was terribly curious about what had happened to those spiders. Kira went to the first floor, where they were working on the dolls. He joyfully exclaimed that they were doing wonderfully. They had already reached the kitchen. The boy thought that they finished the first floor in 3 days. Kira grabbed a board in his hands and told the dolls that now they had to make a bed. The box could be assembled from 2,160 boards. The dolls gathered together and began to discuss something. The boy set off into the forest. He happily said that, by the way, everything was settled with food and shelter. Something else remained. Akira said he asked the spider to appear. Suddenly a spider appeared, but it was much bigger than last time. Akira thought with surprise that now it was really big, and he felt a little uneasy. As expected, if you think about it, it is a bit creepy. The spider shouted joyfully for the master to look at him. Thanks to his generosity and magical power, the body began to recover, and the spider and the children were incredibly grateful to him. The spider asked with interest. Surely a lot of magical power went into creating the barrier, and the golem and all of this, including them, must be kept under control, which greatly complicates his life. Akira leaned toward the spider and smiled. He wanted to say something. It seemed they were really intelligent, but behaved quite friendly. The boy remembered and told the spider that this was exactly what he wanted to ask. Akira thought that he always wore the same worn-out clothes. They had to be washed every day. Akira clenched his fist and confidently thought that spiders weave webs. How had he not thought of this before? He really wants to get new clothes instead of the container. The boy, full of curiosity, asked the spider if he knew what could be used to weave a long thread. The spider looked intently at the boy but did not answer him. Akira involuntarily wondered, did he really understand him? Akira and his friends rushed after the spider. The boy looked at the wolves and smiled, thinking that this time Koa was not at home, so they went with them. Kiro smiled and told Kuro and Shay that he was counting on them. Kuro joyfully exclaimed that they were entrusted to accompany the master. Shay replied, well, since you are the master, then it is necessary. He thought that this is exactly how Koa usually acts. This is a chance to prove what he is capable of. The wolf shouted loudly that he must live up to expectations. Akira asked the spider what had happened here. They saw the caterpillars and screamed in horror. Akira was immediately stunned. After all, these were giant caterpillars. Could it be that he really did something wrong to the spider, and that's why it brought them here? The spider picked up the caterpillars and asked happily what would suit the owner. The wolf asked fearfully, isn't this a deadly poisonous insect? This is dangerous. The spider replied that if he was not angered, everything would be fine. The caterpillar shot threads at Akira. The boy covered his face with his hands and screamed loudly. The wolves and the spider also screamed loudly. The spider asked the caterpillar fearfully what was happening. Akira looked at his hand wrapped in threads and said he was so scared that for a moment he thought he was being attacked. Akira added that he imagined it a bit differently, but these threads look strongly can be used, and he is very grateful to the spider. Spider sighed and happily said that he was ready to accept punishment from the master's hand. Meanwhile, the wolves looked at the master in shock. They were even crying from fear. Kuro said to T with disappointment that there was no work at all. Akira smiled at the spider and asked if it would mind if he took a couple of children home. The caterpillars were placed right on the wolves. They felt bitter humiliation and returned home. The spider said he had warned them not to spit poison, so there is no need to worry. T kept repeating all the time, it's just insects, just insects. Akira awkwardly said that he asks Kuro and T to forgive him, and finally they returned home. Koa smiled and asked Chai why he talks about insects as if he were a wind-up toy. The wolf screamed in fright, no, nothing happened, everything is fine. Kira hugged the wolf tightly and joyfully exclaimed that he is glad Kolo has returned. He asks him to do something nice. Chai was shocked and could not believe that it happened to him. The boy burst into the house and shouted that they had returned. Akira thought, as if he felt it when he was making the bath in the cold chamber, but the stone in that cave accumulates magic, and its effect lasts a long time. He proudly said that now the floor cleans itself, and dirt does not accumulate. Akira shouted to the wolf that the second floor is free, that is exactly where they will make the incubator. He poured out the leaves and said that only airing remains. Akira put 2 caterpillars in a pile of leaves and said that there is enough food for some time. Akira looked at the 2 golems and said that now they need someone to take care of them. He will not be able to be with them all the time, and the dolls cheerfully raised their hands up, as if saying that they can manage on their own. The boy happily said that these dolls will take care of them. The caterpillars started spinning in the leaves out of fear. Akira said in surprise that they are scared but so cute. He tugged at the t-shirt and said that now they will have threads. Akira took off the t-shirt and carefully began to examine it. He was thinking about how to make fabric. They are consulting. The dolls took the t-shirt in their hands and called another doll. The doll instantly began to wave its hands quickly. They started to bring the t-shirt into order so that it could be worn. Akira said in surprise that it is even better than he expected and asked the doll with interest, by the way, how is that bed we talked about? The doll grabbed his hand and led him to another room. Akira saw a big bed and exclaimed with delight that they managed to do everything in just half a day. How well they did. Akira proudly exclaimed that they were getting closer and closer to civilized life. The dolls also looked at him with pride because they had done it all. The boy happily said that he wanted the night to come sooner. Night came. Akira said goodnight to everyone, lay down on the bed and covered himself with a jacket. He was not very comfortable sleeping, so he called Koa to lie next to him, and as he lay on the wolf, Akira thought that the wolf was so soft, like a mattress, even better. Akira entered the room and glanced at the work that was bustling. The room already looked almost ready, and the boy thought that the stone dolls were getting better every day. Akira asked in surprise, were there only bare walls here just yesterday? He approached the table and pushed the chair aside. The boy said that they make such stylish furniture, he recently saw it on the internet. The doll placed a plate of meat on his table and put chopsticks next to it. Kirill joyfully exclaimed that these were chopsticks. Then the doll brought a glass of water. The boy ate some food and smiled. What a pleasure it was, so simple and familiar, like the same meat and the same water, but tasted twice as good. Kira turned his head and began watching how the dolls worked. Suddenly he asked in surprise, there are 8 of them, but where are the other 2? In the room with the caterpillars or what? Kira tried on his new clothes and joyfully exclaimed that now he had a jacket. The boy touched the clothes on himself and exclaimed that now he had a green jacket and black pants. Kiro exclaimed joyfully that they were so smooth, like silk. The boy sat down in front of the leaves and fruits and asked with interest whether the color of the threads really depended on what the caterpillars had eaten. The boy turned his head, smiled, and said that finally Akira noticed the new clothes and joyfully exclaimed about several sets of underwear. Kira felt when they looked at him, of course, he was incredibly embarrassed. The boy approached the doll sitting at the sewing machine, while the other dolls walked around her. The boy said in surprise that they had made a weaving loom as if he had seen one on TV. They made it themselves. It was so cool that he felt a little uneasy. They went outside. Akira happily said that his heart felt so light, so he was sure today their search would succeed. The wolves ran alongside the boy. The boy smiled and told the wolf that he really wanted to find spices. There are stones from which salt can be obtained. They will start by finding out if there is a sea in this world. Kira stepped on a patch of earth and said it was soft. He stopped near the cave entrance and began to peer into the darkness. The boy said they had found another cave. Kira said he did not remember them being there. Koa said it was so strange, such a big hole, so close to home, very strange. They went inside and began to look around. Akira looked down and said that inside there was a gentle slope, but there were also signs of a curse. Kira shouted for the light to turn on. Thanks to his magic, the cave filled with light. The boy told Koa that they needed to go there, but they had to be careful. Kira and all his friends moved deeper into the cave. The boy stopped before another entrance and tensely said that the cave was starting to brighten. Suddenly strange sounds began to come from there. Koa looked ahead angrily, and the boy tensely wondered what it could be. They went inside and saw bats sitting on the ceiling and huge ants on the floor. Kira screamed in fear. What the hell is going on here? An ant crawled up to him. He shed a tear from fear and hysterically shouted that there were huge ants here. Koa roared loudly. Akira shouted loudly, no. And Koa was huge. They lunged at each other, and the boy thought that a confrontation had begun between a giant ant and a giant werewolf. Kira, frightened, realized it was not the time to just stand and watch. The boy shouted that he was calling for cleansing, and the ant continued to advance on Akira and all his friends. The boy, in shock, shouted that it did not work, and the barrier instantly strengthened. The ant jumped high and began to fall on him, and he covered his face with his hands. Kira was completely scared, felt that something bad was about to happen. He closed his eyes because the ant was already approaching him. Kulli stood in front of his master to protect him from the giant ant. Kola bit off the ant's leg and threw it away, and Akira jumped up from the ground, looked at the other ants, and saw that they were covered in some black liquid. The ants stood before the wolves, who were ready to defend themselves. Akira thought for a long time about those black spots. They really displeased him. It seemed something was wrong with them. The wolves became a living shield, covering Akira from the swarm of ants. The barrier worked, but it was too early to relax. Ants began banging their heads against the barrier, trying to break through. The boy exhaled and thought that the barrier seemed to be working. Koa growled angrily at the ants, his fur bristling with rage. Akira wondered why the cleansing had not worked and what to do now. He looked at the giant ants and felt that there were some black spots on their bodes, like the filth that stole the fur from Koa and his friends when they first met. Akira was increasingly convinced. If the curse had completely taken over his body, there must be a way to expel it, and he had to find it to save himself. Koa shouted loudly when he noticed that one of the ants had broken through the barrier. Akira screamed in horror. The ant began to fall right on the boy, who did not know what to do. Akira turned away and shouted, no. Suddenly the barrier activated and threw the ants away from the boy. Koa growled fiercely, noticing that his master was in danger. Akira screamed in fear, no, the picture doesn't add up. We need to do something. Does this mean that there are not one but 2 beings in one body? Does this mean they are possessed? The boy kept thinking as if they were bound by invisible chains. Akira shouted loudly that he understood everything. The curse that had taken over the mind must be destroyed. The boy stretched out his hand forward and shouted loudly to lift the curse. The ants glowed. The curse began to leave them, and the black spots disappeared from their bodies. Mureka thought that the black magic that filled the forest poisoned the river water and the fruits of the trees. The kings of the forest resist, but their resistance becomes weaker and weaker, and people do not hear their pleas. He was increasingly convinced that a new monster would emerge somewhere, and the forest would again drown in darkness. Around only darkness, dark magic entwines the soul and body, and they too turned into monsters and became enemies of the forest. Mureka said no after all, the king of the forest is powerless here. Oh, the dragon that lives in the forest waters asks to help them. He closed his eyes and nothing else happened. Mureka opened his eyes and saw Akira, who asked if everything was all right. The boy stroked his head and exclaimed with admiration how smooth he was. Ant was shocked and did not understand what was happening. Koa admitted that at first he did not recognize him, but it was still him, and suddenly Ant exclaimed, "You are King Fenrir." Antfer crawled somewhere and everyone followed him. Akira raised his head and noticed ants crawling on the ceiling. Suddenly he stumbled and almost fell, but the ants saved him. The boy smiled and said he was grateful to him. Akira looked at the ant and thought that Koa said everything is fine. Half an hour had passed, and she looked quite ordinary, but was she really as harmless as a spider? Mureka froze and looked somewhere aside. Kuril asked in surprise, "Have they come?" The boy shouted loudly, "Let the light appear." The room lit up, and now everything was visible. Koa asked if this was the home of the water dragon, and heard in response that it was true. In the times of King Fenrir, there should have been a beautiful sacred lake here, full of magical power, but it was no longer there, right? Akira touched the barrier and shouted angrily that this terrible curse had happened again. He demanded to remove it through cleansing, and the boy thought that maybe other creatures also suffer from such possession, like this ant. The boy sighed heavily and thought that he must imagine how the spell entwines the whole forest. Akira shouted loudly, ordering to remove the curse. He was sure that the curse would not return. The cave lit up with white light. Koa shouted in surprise and loudly called Akira to look. The boy opened his eyes and looked at the lake, which was shining and sparkling. Akira and the others were admiring this beautiful lake, cleansed from the curse. To see and understand what it was, and where this cleansing and healing power came from, they left the cave. The boy relaxed a little and felt slight fatigue. Akira looked at the sky and said that yes, they had a problem with spices. The boy petted Koa and, smiling, said they needed to keep searching. An ant crawled after them, and Akira awkwardly thought that it was following them well, let it go. The boy turned his head, noticed a fruit, picked it, and joyfully exclaimed that he managed to get it. Akira brought it to his mouth when suddenly Koa asked what was edible here. He said there was no smell, bit a piece, and shouted in surprise that it was salty. The boy turned to Koa and joyfully exclaimed that he finally tried the salt he had dreamed of. They would gather as much as they could carry and return home. Maizrose screamed in horror at what had happened. They were in the forest, and the man had stepped away briefly when he returned. He saw that many knights were wounded and defeated. It all started about half a month ago. Maizrost was in Gonmulsa's office, and the man said to his comrade with dissatisfaction that now he was giving one apology after another. Maizros asked with disappointment, "I just returned from the forest, and now I have to investigate something again. Does the king want to drive the knights of the fourth squad to death?" Ganmils told Maizros to watch his tongue. No one asked for his opinion, and the man shouted angrily that he had already made a lot of effort when the magic stone cracked. He added, "What's there to break just a scratch? Magical stones that can be obtained after defeating monsters, the size of a pinky tip." Maizros said that compared to them, the stone in the castle was simply gigantic. This crack would do it no harm. Genmulsa listened to him attentively. He picked up some document in his hands and said that yes, it said that when the magic stone was first found, it was all cracked. Miserast exclaimed in surprise that it was true, so there was no need to panic especially. The man continued, "However, if the situation is really not as simple as it seems at first glance, the problem must be approached as carefully as possible." Mizaras imagined that the knights of the 4th Division tirelessly worked in the forest mostly, they defeated and captured monsters, and another of their tasks was to explore these thickets. He repeatedly told himself that they had been here more than once and nothing supernatural ever happened, around only a dark, gloomy forest, just like always. Mizoros assured his friend that this time too he saw nothing serious in it. Gunmulza asked what he thought, and what if something was happening in the very heart of the forest. Mizroz got up from the sofa and asked in surprise what he meant by all those kings of the forest. Gan Mills replied that he did not know, and Mizroz thought that he really did not know, but there was something in it. Mizoros laughed and asked him if he was really afraid. Indeed, because of monsters possessed by the magic of the evil eye, reaching the depths of the forest would be very difficult. This is a big problem. The man continued to insist that even if something went wrong, their strongest nation in the world could not lose, and Gamels replied that they were hoping for that. Mizros left his friend's house. Some boy ran up to him and said that he was asked to select 20 talented slaves, after which Mizros turned around and looked at him carefully. He replied that he needed only a minute. He needed to submit a request for the preparation of the knights. This time he only needed the most elite warriors. The journey to the forest would take, at best, 10 days. The boy shouted that something was happening to him, immediately ran off and fled somewhere. Mizuros sighed and asked why Jin Meals was so cautious, and the knight commander of the first squad of knights asked what it was about. Mizros said awkwardly that no, he did not mean anything like that at all. They had been friends for years, but he was sure he was too smart to worry about it. The guy, by the way, stated that he is the only knight who does not use slaves. Mizerost replied to the knight that, it seems, for him slaves are the same people. Mizeros believed that the slaves of Esperanza were branded from birth with the strongest slave brand. They felt no emotions, did not rebel, and did not utter a single word without orders. The man said that essentially they become almost asexual beings. If you don't fixate on it, life would be much easier. No matter how you look at it, slaves remain slaves. The boy smiled and replied that he agreed of the same opinion, and Mizrak softly said that he was still not as cruel as the commander of the 5th squad. He continued, if you think about it, it's no wonder that so many people sacrifice to the magic stone. The boy watched the commander intently. Mizrost awkwardly shouted at him to forget about it. The boy burst out laughing and said that he liked this side of Mizrost's fireplace. The man angrily asked him if he was mocking him. Gamels was filling out documents in the office and was still convinced that, despite Mizarov's words, they would have to go deeper into the forest, otherwise they would learn nothing. He could not shake the thought, although he considered that the knights of the 4th squad were already experienced scouts of the village. They had not even covered a tenth of it, and that was not very good. Ganmills was convinced that this forest occupied half of their world, and no one ever reached its depths. He had heard that hundreds of years after that magic was cast, the forest inhabitants began to counterattack. The man approached the bookshelf and took one of the books, but did not believe it could affect the magic stone beyond the barrier standing over the forest. Gunmills sat at the table and thought that, moreover, since that stone was found, it had already claimed countless victims, and from this it had noticeably strengthened. The man put the pen back into the inkwell and wondered if it meant exactly what he thought. Gunmilza, shocked, asked if someone stronger than the kings of the forest had really appeared. Half a month later, the knights were fighting a monster in the forest. They shouted loudly and pierced it with their swords. The monster fell to the ground and never got up again. The knight laughed loudly. His friends shouted joyfully that they had succeeded, and Mizerost approached them and asked discontentedly if they would stop it already. The knight replied that it was ridiculous. Mizerost said without any emotion, that's the point. Even after walking in the forest for about half a day, they still hadn't encountered many monsters. The man kept repeating that there were only 4 of them, although there should usually be 10. And moreover, these were magic-enhanced monsters from his country, which were supposed to attack only forest animals. Mizeros grumbled discontentedly that this would become a problem if only mages went with them, but they could not be blamed for that, and he turned his head to the forest, thinking that something was wrong here. The boy looked at the trees and asked if this forest was strange, and they replied no, everything was as usual. It was a completely ordinary forest, nothing to worry about. Mizerast hugged himself and awkwardly thought that something was wrong with him. This strange feeling, fear, was slowly penetrating his soul. Hearing strange sounds, he shouted loudly for everyone to stop. Mizeros thought that now they could rest. The knight shouted for the scouts to get to work. He added loudly that they needed to move forward and check if there were any dangerous creatures nearby. Mizeros said that if there was no danger, then their goal was not Miyagi. Commander added that it was necessary to ensure that 5 slaves guarded in 3 shifts, and the knights addressed tensely with the fact that something strange was here. Mizerast asked sternly if there were any ideas. The knight awkwardly replied no, nothing like that. The commander sighed heavily from all the problems that had fallen on him. The deputy commander approached, looked at the frightened knights, and loudly ordered them to calm down. If they did not rest, they would not be able to continue the journey. He continued, the slaves, they say, were not afraid, but not because of innate courage. They had sharp hearing and smell, so, as he thought, now it was safer for them. The man said he had received information there was no threat nearby. Mizeroth smiled and said that if so, they could continue the mission. Suddenly they heard a scream. Mizeros anxiously turned to the forest, saw the barrier shine. This meant someone was trying to break through it, and the knight shouted in fear, Jedites. Mizerost was shocked and thought he had passed through a wall of light. No one attacked and everyone was safe, but everything seemed strange. The monster roared loudly. The ground beneath the knight's feet began to glow, and they screamed in fear. Mizaro roared loudly, ordering to calm down and prepare for a counterattack. Some time passed, and the man inspected all the damage they had suffered. Mizerost fell to the ground and whispered in shock, what happened? So it was an attack by the forest lord. Those lying on the ground were just unconscious. No one was injured. The knight ran up to him and shouted anxiously that they had not found a single slave. Miserost asked in surprise what he meant. He thought everyone had disappeared. The knight replied no, it seemed they had fled on their own. The man, disbelieving, thought the emblem of slavery was broken. Miserost said this needed to be reported to the king. Akira was walking through the forest. He told the ant that if they were going to be together, they had to come up with a name. Naming that huge ant was a bit difficult for him. The boy thoughtfully said it could be a red or crimson body, although he would be called Shuri, a very beautiful name. The ant said that if it came to that. The ant's voice broke off when the wolves growled contentedly, and the black wolf joyfully exclaimed that Koa and Akuro had returned late today and could no longer sit next to the golem. Koa said he had apologized to them for that. The wolf asked with interest what had happened, and the black wolf replied that he had caught prey and decided to leave it in the room where they usually kept everything. He pitifully added that he was struck by a huge sword, and it was done by a golem. Nothing could be scarier. The wolf noticed a huge ant and, in shock, shouted that it was the guardian of hell. The spider asked with interest why the guardian of hell was near his master. The ant angrily shouted for him to say what he was doing here. The insects stood facing each other. Kira asked in surprise if the two really did not get along. He begged them not to fight. The giant insects looked at him and noticed that the boy was really scared. The ant told the spider that since nothing could be done, he suggested making a truce. The spider replied that he did not like him, but if the master wanted it, so be it, because they also did not want to lose their home. Koa thought that the master had united two races that so fiercely hated each other. The master's power was truly enormous, so now they found themselves in the same boat. Akira returned home and entered the room where the dolls were working. He exclaimed in surprise they had already finished the ceiling. The golem began to jump and show the boy something. The boy asked for boards, but those boards were already ready, as were the beams. He understood everything and would soon bring new materials for the room. Kira smiled and said that tomorrow there would be even more important work. The boy took out new fruits and loudly, confidently exclaimed that much had already been done, and his next goal was to make salt. He said that he was terribly afraid that it might not work, so he would use only 5 and hide the rest in the safe. In it, he placed magic that stops time, and so far it seems that everything works. Akira said that he would first cover the silver bowl with cloth, and then squeeze the juice directly into it, and the boy began to press the fruits with all his might. The juice immediately began to flow. The boy smiled and said that he had done quite a lot. It remained to slowly cook the juice so that nothing would burn. The wolves watched the man with interest. Akira said excitedly that the juice was still a bit dirty, so he had to strain it again. He did this for 2 hours, and the wolves had already dozed off from waiting. The boy looked into the cup and joyfully exclaimed that the salt was ready. Akira ran away shouting that now he would be a wonderful salt container. Eventually, he filled all the containers with salt. Akira joyfully said that from that too hard gold, which was difficult to use, a beautiful vessel came out. He was so happy because he finally had salt. The boy began waving a jar of salt and joyfully shouting that now he could easily use not only silver, but also magical gold. Kira smiled. He had been working hard all afternoon just to taste delicious meat. The boy carefully cut the steaks and placed them on the table. He said that the thawed steak should be generously sprinkled with salt and briefly covered with aromatic leaves. The wolves leaned in to try it. Kiro said that it was salt, so it could not be eaten. The boy put the meat on the stove and said that it needed to be fried very carefully so that it would turn out tasty. He said that he would really like a frying pan and some oil. Saw on television that lard is made from pork fat, and when the meat is ready, it is wrapped in cloth and left to rest a bit. Kira put the food on the plate and, smiling, said that in the end the meat should look fried. The boy tried a piece and groaned with pleasure. He exclaimed from the taste of the meat. The wolf stretched out its paw to the bowl. Akira caught it, laughing, and asked what they had not prepared for them. This meat is salty, so they cannot have it. Vovk really wanted to try it. Akira couldn't resist and admitted, tasty, but only a little. The boy treated his friends to delicious meat with salt. He sighed and said that he would also have to watch over them so they wouldn't eat too much junk food, since they knew Karen would be eating it with them. The boy glanced at the board where a piece of meat lay, but the bird was not there. Akira raised his head and called Karen. The bird flew into the sky and flew somewhere without warning anyone. Kuro stirred the water in the barrel. He, with tears in his eyes, said that Karen had not returned since yesterday. She was wild, so everything should be fine. The boy fiercely scooped up water and began stirring it, hysterically shouting that she was still so small animals or some other horror could attack her. He was terribly worried. Koa smiled and said that if the master was so worried about Karen, it was in vain. She was always by his side anyway, and she probably had a lot of magical powers. The wolf anxiously asked the boy, what about him? Had his magical powers returned yet? Akira hugged the wolf and cried, exclaiming with delight that Kola was worried about him. The boy scratched the wolf and joyfully exclaimed that he had asked him and the other wolves not to leave him. Koa cheerfully asked the master to scratch him more. He really liked it. Akira hugged the wolf and thought that he had calmed down a bit, and it was time to get to work. The boy decided to take on the skins. He remembered that he had already tried to process them before, but it was not easy. He continued to think that first he needed to get rid of the meat and fat, and tried to do it with magic, but everything shattered into pieces. Akira touched the meat and said that if he had taken a knife, he would have made a bunch of holes in it, cutting off the excess. He decided to wash the skin, but the water immediately darkened with dirt, and the skin itself shrank and began to stink. He thought that the hardest part was still ahead. Akira hung the skin on a board and said that now it was drying. The boy thought that the skin always hardened at the edges, after which it was impossible to soften it. Akira continued to think that, of course, he had no idea what he was doing wrong. He did not know how to process skins, and the boy said that this one needed to be washed again. The boy threw the skin and the wolf caught it. Akira sighed. If only he had a good skin, he could make a blanket or a rug from it, and having obtained it also boots and other small things. The boy imagined all this and thought that it was just a fairy tale. The wolf muttered that he would like to know what the master had been doing lately. It did not look edible at all. Kola brought the animal in his teeth. Akira exclaimed joyfully that they could wait a little longer before returning. The spider stopped the boy and showed him his prey, proudly saying that he himself had hunted successfully today. Akira looked at his friend, who had changed from fear. He felt uneasy. Since Suri appeared, Oyadama had been growing and growing, as if deliberately competing with him, and how large could animals grow in this world. Akira glanced at Koa and said that he was also the size of a car. The boy happily said that they also had salt, so he would try to make ham. The next day Akira ran into the clearing, frightened, shouting that he had left the skin in the water just yesterday. The boy pulled the wet skin out of the water. He said that nothing would happen if it was dried. Akira noted with disgust that the water had turned brown. The boy hung it to dry, touched it, and said in surprise that it had become softer than before. The boy was curiously amazed at what was going on, and Akira said it was because he had left that stick in the water. He picked it up and explained that tree sap was flowing from it. Akira grabbed a bucket of water and said with a smile that as soon as he gathered those logs, he would try to make a decoction. He could have started already, but was not yet sure. Akira shouted loudly that he was collecting stone golems, kuni. The boy picked up the doll and joyfully exclaimed that this time they turned out so cute. The ant howled in horror. The master was making more and more of these golems, and Akira thought that, by the way, he had named the golems that were before the first and third. The boy smiled and ordered the first to bring here 3 skins that he had frozen. The golems brought them and tried to show something, and Akira asked in surprise what exactly they wanted to try. Akira watched with interest as the golems worked. He felt awkward. Was everything going too fast? The boy approached them and carefully examined their work. He said with interest that they divided the solution into 3 parts and then broke it. The golem showed how they dried the leather. Akira shouted that now it was clear. If you pull like that, the leather will not shrink. The boy nervously thought, although he created them, they were more skillful than him. How could this happen? The dolls began showing him something, and Akira shouted in surprise that they needed more firewood, and there was not enough space in front of the house. The boy came into the forest and looked at the stumps. He asked himself if he was the first to ask it for firewood, so why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Akira felled another tree. He touched it and said that all the trees here are several hundred years old, and he even felt sorry to cut them down. Koa pointed to a tree and joyfully exclaimed that the owner needed it too. The boy asked in surprise what else needs to be cut down. Isn't this enough? Akira replied that probably the edges need to be processed, and then transferred to the 3rd and minus 1st floor. He noticed how the dolls grabbed the boards. Akira asked with interest what else they were doing. The dolls did not answer, but simply ran away. The boy wiped the sweat and sighed tiredly. He looked at the cut-down forest and sighed. It seems I overdid it. Akira entered the house and began taking off his shoes, saying that today he would leave them here. The boy entered the room and saw the armchair that the doll gladly presented. Akira turned his head and exclaimed with delight that this was exactly the hanging chair he had dreamed of since school. The boy gladly added this, and they recreated everything with such detail that it was eerie. He went into another room and saw a bathtub that Akira touched and exclaimed with delight that it was also made of wood. He moved on to explore the house, and the boy exclaimed excitedly that the stairs were covered with boards and had railings. There were even small anti-slip pads, but there were no doors in the toilet either. Akira smiled, thinking that Karen would be surprised when she returned, and just at that moment the bird returned to the cave. She was happily looking at the clear water. She was waiting for something. The boy returned to the forest and said that today he needed to decide something about that clearing of stumps. He stopped and, looking down in surprise, examined the ground where the stumps had been yesterday, and Akira shouted in shock. What happened? He said that the stumps simply disappeared. Akira noticed how ants were dragging one of the stumps. The boy said that the ants were doing it. he followed them to their cave. He smiled and said that their aunt took them. The ant's friend noticed him and joyfully exclaimed that he was happy to see his master in their home. He could pass through. It was much more convenient here than in Oyadama's nest. The ant cast an impatient glance at him. Akira felt as if he was being lured into a trap. The boy awkwardly said that he apologized but would restrain himself. The boy noticed how the ants were crawling underground. He said that the ants were hiding underground. Akira shouted in surprise that they had perfectly leveled the holes from the stumps. The soil was well loosened. The boy happily said that of course if it works out, why not make garden beds for them, so he wouldn't have to run looking for vegetables every time, and he could grow as much as needed. Kuril smiled and added that he would start with potatoes from this world. They seemed undemanding. The boy thought that if it was about soil, he knew whom to ask. Kira ran up to Suri and asked what he knew about vegetables that grow underground. The boy quickly drew a picture on the ground to make it easier for the ant to understand. Suri looked at him in surprise. Akira said that he wanted something that hides underground and that could be eaten. The ant stirred excitedly and quickly began to crawl away. Akira smiled and waved his hand at him. The boy took a handful of soil in his hands and asked the doll, "Since we are making garden beds, please make fertilizer." His father often told him about fertilizer. Kira and the dolls eagerly got to work. The boys said that first they would dig a hole in the shade of the trees, then build a wooden fence and fill it with food scraps mixed with dry grass and leaves. The boy and the dolls stomped on the ground to press down various trash. Akira lowered his hand to the soil and said, "To start decomposition, it needs to be thoroughly moistened." He happily said that the humidity was just perfect. Now all that was left was to wait. Akira added that, by the way, long ago out of curiosity, he opened the composter and looked inside, and a whole bunch of beetles poured out on him. The boy stretched his hands forward and began to cast a spell. Akira shouted loudly that it was a very long process and would try to speed up time. Magic is so convenient. The boy said that the temperature had risen and there was a strong smell. Akira ordered the dolls to stir the compost there, and he himself again began to speed up time. The wolves were hunting boars, running after them quickly, and joyfully they were having incredible fun. Koa grabbed a boar and joyfully exclaimed that they hadn't hunted so happily for a long time. Suddenly he saw a bright light. He exclaimed in surprise, "What is this?" Was it really what he thought? Akira smiled and said that it was even better than he imagined, and the temperature was normal, so for now he would leave everything as it was. He looked at the sky and saw a beautiful and large bird. He said in surprise, "What is this?" Akira shouted in shock, "Who is she? What is she doing? Is it really Karen?" The little bird cheerfully cried that she was here, skillfully flew up and settled on the boy's head, and Akira, noticing her sharp claws, screamed in horror for her to stop, but she could not. The bird howled he did not want her to come closer. Akira awkwardly shouted that he apologized, that he did not want this, and extended his hand to her. Kuril hugged the little bird and joyfully exclaimed that she surprised him. He was so glad that she returned unharmed and became such a beauty, and the little bird accepted the praise with a smile. Koa ran in, shouting that it was Karen. The little bird said that it was true. She asked her master to take care of him. With her magic, she could not do more for him. Kira looked at the creature in surprise and asked what it was. Although she had wings, she was just hanging in the air, and the boy thought, "No, first the curse must be removed." Kira loudly shouted that he was calling for cleansing. The creature shone brightly. Kola asked in surprise if it was really a water dragon. Karen replied that it was. The forest was truly reviving. Koa thought that among the nights hid the 5 elements that make up the forest itself and its divine beasts. Dragons had protected the forest from human attacks for many years, but soon all of them disappeared. Koa told the bird that, however, if the water dragon comes, the forest waters will become beautiful again. Karen joyfully replied that she thinks so too and sincerely hopes for it. The wolf said that they greatly influenced the state of flora and fauna. If the dragons regain their power, the forest will instantly come to life. Karen promised King Kulefenrir that she would find other dragons and bring them to their lord. Koa replied that since she is so agile, he had no choice but to entrust her with this task. Phoenix Karen could rely on him for the master's protection. Karen said she doesn't think he will need it. Koa briefly answered, "I don't care." Akira joyfully exclaimed that the creature has such a beautiful blue color. The boy stubbornly insisted that he is fluffy, like a ball of yarn. Akira curiously asked what kind of creature it is and why it looks like that, and Karen awkwardly replied that she doesn't know. Hula said that it is definitely a water dragon. Akira smiled and said that to the touch it is so pleasant, like a fluffy creature, and it happily flew into the air. Akira smiled and asked what to name his fluffy one now. The creature began to flap its wings more strongly, and Koa joyfully shouted how wonderful it is. The owner gave the water dragon a name. Karen laughed and shouted, "Fluffy sounds so cool." Akira smiled and said, "I hope he likes it." The boy looked at the wolves. Akira said that Shin and the others have returned. He could not understand how they could carry more prey than his group. The the wolf happily dragged the boar to another place. He happily ran up to the boy and shouted with excitement that today is another big win. Akira asked in surprise why Shin is not in the water. He was sure that he swims. Akira looked at his friends and thought that Pukasi birds grow up at the same time mysterious creatures. The boy awkwardly said that sometimes wolves swim in other worlds. He approached the prey brought by the wolf and thought that lately he has noticeably improved his skills, and Akira praised the wolf. What a skillful hunter you are. The boy petted Karen and happily said that she had also returned after a long absence, so he needed to prepare a lot of meat for her. He cut a lot of meat. Akira sighed wearily and said that after all this he had already gotten used to such work, although he did not want to eat them. The boy took out a stone and asked in surprise, "What kind of stone is this near the heart?" Akira took out a few more stones, complaining that something was wrong with him, and asked where they came from. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that there were even more stones. The boy carefully examined the stone. He said that it seemed they were not in all animals, but perhaps only in those he had caught. Akira shouted loudly that he was calling for purification. The boy looked at the stone in his hand and said that nothing had happened. He thought it had nothing to do with the curse. Akira smiled and confidently said that it did not matter now. The dolls made a basin. Akira laughed joyfully and said that he really wanted to try something similar. He crafted a stove from silver ore. The boy kept insisting that he would throw in a few round stones and they would be ready to work. Akira thought that stones from the Rocky Mountains were easier to process and the magic cast on them lasted longer. He added that they seemed not to fear heat and hoped that with their help they would arrange a barbecue. Akira exclaimed that they needed to imagine the coals and feel the heat right now. The boy happily said that next time the food could be skewered on a spit made of gold ore. Akira made something like a belt and threw it over the new cooking device. He looked at Karen. She was already drooling in anticipation of the food. Akira said that he always grills like this, but the shape is also important. He asked the bird to wait a little. The dish was almost ready. Akira smiled and said that Karen should know. The master and his family have long been grilling meat, so raw meat should be left for Koa and Suri. He turned his head and saw Koa, who was looking at him happily. Akira, surprised, asked if he really only ate their intestines. The wolf licked his lips, and the boy whispered that he understood everything. Akira was worried whether the meat would harm Fluffy. He added a little salt and a drop of lemon for himself. The boy happily bit off a piece of meat. He smiled and said it was so tasty that he would have to think about kitchenware. The wolves surrounded the boy and began eating the raw meat. Akira smiled and said that he also needed sauce and many other interesting things. He looked at the stone and added that although this stone looked ordinary, he was curious whether magical power could be transmitted through it. He released a little magic and the stone immediately accepted it. Akira exclaimed in shock, "Wow, the magical power spread instantly." He thought that now the stone on Rocky Mountain best nourished magic, and it was the one he could use most often. Akira kept convincing himself that it was obvious the effect would weaken as soon as the given magical power was spent. Just as he was hurrying, one day the toilet cleaner stopped working. The boy suggested trying to use it for something bringing more and more magical power, because it seemed he could store quite a lot of it. Akira looked at the stone under the sun and shouted in surprise, how cool it was. It changed color, transparent green, like a precious stone. He asked excitedly if other stones were the same, and Akira said there were green, red, dark red, and light blue ones, all depending on the type of demon. The boy said these stones were not like the others. As soon as they changed color, their magic disappearancy were beautiful, but he didn't even know what to do with them. Akira hesitated and said that maybe he could get a decent amount for them, but he had no one to trade with. The wolf jumped happily. The boy asked Koa in surprise what had happened. The wolf sighed and began to create magic. Akira looked at him in shock and shouted excitedly that it was magic, of course, thought he could use it too, but why? Vovk threw a stone. Akira asked what he was doing with that red stone. Koa began to release even more magic and watched the boy intently. Akira gave him another stone and said, "All right." The boy nervously thought, no, he really doesn't understand what he wants to say. He needs to quickly figure out what's what. Akira asked if this stone could double the power. He took one stone in his hands and said he would try. Akira took a glass and shouted loudly that he was calling water. The glass quickly filled with water so much that it began to overflow and splash. The boy joyfully exclaimed, "Wow." Akira thought he had unexpectedly received a useful thing and would think later how to use it. The boy noticed Suri and said he was glad of his return. Muraha showed vegetables growing in the ground and said he had brought a lot for the master. Akira took a vegetable in his hands and happily asked if he could eat it all. The ants looked at the boy with hope. Suri shouted that he, let's say, could just bite it off. These roots taste more like pecan together with meat. He begs the master to try. Akira put all the vegetables in the bag and said he was grateful but not hungry yet. The ant exclaimed excitedly, "No, how come?" The boy went away, saying they would first create a field. Surprised, Suri asked what this gentleman was doing now and where he was heading. The spider laughed and asked what he didn't like. Akira approached the dolls, holding a hose. He asked in shock when they did that. Akira took the tool in his hands and said that thanks to the little ants digging it up, it would be a piece of cake. He began to say that first you need to mix the made compost with the soil and then dig it up, but honestly he only helped with the compost, so he didn't know how to grow anything. Akira decisively said he had to try. As soon as the bud is ready, you need to make a hole. The boy tried, succeeded, and asked what it should look like. They dug up the whole field. Akira said he thought that was enough. These tubers, similar to potatoes, need to be cut in half and planted. The boy picked up a strange vegetable and asked what it was. Akira said that this one seemed cursed, but then he wondered if he was all right. The ant brought another piece of vegetable and cheerfully shouted that he has char bai. Suri continued to explain that these fruits swell when soaked in water and then become incredibly tasty. The boy smiled and said that he would have to trust Suri. Akira raised the hoe and said that the garden beds should have been made higher so that the water would drain better. The boy looked at the perfect beds they had made. He cheerfully said that it was funny. He thought he would start a small garden, but it turned out to be a real farm. He planted about 100 tubers, and the field still seemed half empty. Kurl asked what mistake he could have made. Suri, stunned, asked why the master buried them again when they had used all their strength to gather them. Koa said that it was strange. Karen joyfully exclaimed that she did not know, but probably he thinks more deeply. Akira said that it was good that he planted them, but what season is it now? It is warmer here than when he came. The boy added that it was eternal trouble and also weeds, and Akira thought, well, I will make a few more stone dolls, and also made a few magic stones. Akira took a stone in his hands and said that caring for the crops only requires weeding, watering, fertilizing, and pest control, so he thought it would be useful to apply magic to the stone dolls as well. The boy recalled that since yesterday he had tried several things and found that red stones enhance fire magic and blue ones enhance water magic. Akira looked at the doll. He said that he did not know if this made the thing suitable. Green stones, he thinks, are connected with nature, and transparent ones, he wonders what kind of stones those are. Akira joyfully exclaimed that now a little magic can be added to each doll. The new dolls watched the boy intently. He, smiling, said that he was having a good morning. The boy loudly shouted for them to get to work. He left them working in the fields. Akira and friends came to the lake. The boy happily said that the lake he cleaned last time is now completely clean. Why do they need a lake? Said Akira. They need soy sauce, but there was no soy. If there were slaves, they could make fish sauce. He added that he was sure. On television, they said that they just mix salt with fish and fermented. It's a bit strange, but he likes fish sauce. Akira looked at Fluffy and smiled, saying that he looks good today. He tries to say something to him, but cannot understand what exactly. He took out a fishing rod and exclaimed that it was wonderful. He made the hook himself, so maybe it will work. He already told the wolf that they would catch fish with it. Kurl awkwardly added that fish, that is dinner, and suddenly felt the fishing rod twitch. He shouted in surprise, "What is happening?" A huge fish jumped out of the lake. The boy, shocked, exclaimed that it was gigantic. The fish jumped onto the shore right in front of Akira and his friends. Fluffy happily began to circle around their catch. Akira thought that they immediately got about 10 times more than planned. It was not what it seemed. He smiled and thanked Fluffy. He skillfully caught fish. The boy said that maybe they would try fish sauce. He would make a little when they return home, and the rest he would just fry with salt. He hadn't eaten fish for a very long time. Hard times came to the castle. Miserust and his soldiers came to the king to report what had happened, and the king's assistant exclaimed in surprise, "What happened? Let him repeat." Genmilza carefully watched as the knights entered the castle. He thought that the fourth squad returned quite quickly. He noticed Miserost's tired and depressed face. Gamels asked in surprise what had happened after all. Not even a month had passed. Suddenly a knight ran into his office and, shouting, apologized. The leaders of the knights were ordered to gather immediately in the audience hall. The advisor asked Miserust what it meant, and finally they found out the reason for the damage to the magic stone. The man thought irritably that he was a warrior and obeyed all orders for the sake of his country. He persistently insisted that he was ready to give even his life, but he would not kill people without reason. Mizaro only replied, "That's exactly why." The man said that as soon as they stepped into the forest, suddenly a huge wall of light fell upon them, and when he came to, everyone was already fighting. Misers continued tremblingly to say that, moreover, reinforced monsters of their country had risen against them. The situation had reached a dead end, and they could not make the right choice. The advisor angrily asked if it was true that the slaves had fled, that is, they had not even died, but simply ran away. Miserost quietly replied that yes, and the advisor roared that this was nonsense. The king rose from the throne and walked past his commanders. The advisor shouted in fear, "What is the king doing?" He could not believe it, it simply could not be. The advisor loudly shouted for the fourth squad to be ready for further orders. Mizrost looked at him stunned, and everyone began to leave the main hall. Genel said goodbye, calling Mizrost a coward. Mizrost and his assistants sighed heavily. Genel put his hand on his shoulder and said he was glad to see that he was okay. Mizoros said he did not know what would happen now. The man asked what had happened in that forest. Mizoros said everything looked the same, but it was terrible. He added that it seemed as if the forest itself was pushing them away. When a huge wall of light passed through it, he honestly thought he had died. The slaves just scattered, and the soldiers stood in their places. Mizorast admitted that he had no idea what was going on here. Gamels pondered, could this be a warning? He asked if it was something more than just a forest ring. Who was he? Mizrost eagerly asked what he meant, saying that it was Lord Forest, and Genmels replied that if he had such power, he would have driven them out much earlier. The man decisively said that he was right. Ganmils noted that perhaps someone more powerful than just the Forest King had appeared. Mizrost looked at him in surprise. The king was walking through the corridors and angrily thought that this was nonsense. The slaves had escaped. This could not have happened. It could only happen in one case. The slave emblem, reinforced by a magic stone, had lost its power. He said that it was unthinkable. Magical stones had been strengthened for centuries by sacrifices, and the king, looking out the window, thought that the guards protecting him and the country were doing their job properly. The man thought that behind the mutation of the enhanced magical beast released into the forest lay a simple truth. The magic stone had revived instincts that this mutation had distorted. The king increasingly believed, with the help of the stone, one could seize all the power of the forest and become king of the world, so he would do everything the gods said, take the forest's magic and limit its animals as much as he could. The man said that for decades they had been unable to do anything against them. One more step, and it would all be over. The king threw his sword at the slave and killed him. He shouted angrily that something was wrong with him. He could no longer endure it. He ordered the forest to be burned to the ground so that nothing remained. Akira took a knife and joyfully exclaimed that he could finally prepare that fish sauce he had always dreamed of. He would remove the head, gut the insides, and even remove the blood, then slice the cleaned fish. The boy looked at the pieces of fish and awkwardly said that the silver knife cut perfectly. Only salt needed to be added, but salt was too precious, so they had to rely on the amount they had. Akira said that about 20 should be enough. The boy sorted the fish and said that salted fish should be packed in the jar so tightly that there was not a single gap between them. He kept repeating it all the way to the top and was not sure whether to sprinkle salt on top as well. Akira tied the jar and said to store it in a cool, dark place for a year or two. The boy smiled and thought that this was where the magic happened. Akira said he would leave it for 3 months, and it looked a bit soft and mushy, or that was how the natural preparation process should go, another 6 months. Koa smiled and asked what the gentleman had come up with this time. Suri replied that he did not know, but it smelled delicious. Akira smiled and said he sensed a stinky and unique aroma. Was it really a success? He said that now he moves on to the next step, to strain the sauce through a packed cloth. The sauce turned out a nice light brown color. Akira exclaimed with a smile that he has a precious drop, quite salty, but simply amazing in taste. He stopped there, and now it was time to cook. The boy went to fry the meat. Akira said that he froze the rest of the fish, and today they planned to grill it. He had dreamed about this for a long time, and was sure that Karen would return home soon, so he would also cook meat for her. Akira said that when the dish is ready, it should be flipped and poured with fish sauce. The boy poured the sauce and joyfully exclaimed how delicious it smells. The boy tried the dish and shouted with delight. Tears welled up in his eyes. The salt itself seems insufficient, but the taste that appears during fermentation burns, and the smell is even harder to describe. It is just incredibly tasty. Akira said that it was delicious. He wanted white rice, and it was all worth it. The animals gathered around him in a crowd, waiting for him to share. The boy laughed and exclaimed no, it was some kind of soul variety, so they would not like it. He was absolutely sure of that. Akira looked into the wild eyes of the wolves and realized that he was scared. He said, all right, just a drop. Akira took a piece of meat and said that he had to cook another one for Karen. It was really creepy. Suri asked excitedly if, since it was really so scary, maybe he would not go, and Akira replied that he did not know if Suri could handle the grilled steak. The boy added that one should eat slower because it is hot. Akira noticed a spider reaching for the meat and shouted in shock, "What is it doing now?" The boy finally sat down to eat. He joyfully said that the fish was so tasty. Akira looked shyly, overwhelmed with fear. The wolf was stunned. Wolves, golems, and insects were eating the fish. The boy thought tiredly that someone had to stop him. Night fell and Akira flopped onto the bed. The boy sighed. He was so tired that the only comfort for him was the soft futon. He thought about those little devils and decided to check on them tomorrow. They looked like some kind of barn. A doll in a shirt approached Akira. The boy asked in surprise what it was. He put it on himself and exclaimed with delight that his clothes had become much better. The ant and the golems worked together on the farm. Akira smiled and said he would help, but the doll quickly shook its head, indicating that they did not need help. The boy approached the dolls working with hides and asked what they needed to do. They showed that they could manage without him, and the same happened when he approached the dolls working with boards. Akira asked fearfully, "What? He is good for nothing." The spider and the ant approached him with stones, so he joyfully exclaimed that he wanted him to pour magical power into him. The spider shouted, "No, into this one, please, first into him." Akira, smiling, said he was glad to be asked for something. He awkwardly asked what he should do. Karo looked at the brought stones and thought that magical power was emanating from them. The boy awkwardly looked into the eyes of the spider and the ant, who were expecting something from him. Silence prevailed in the air. Akira touched the stones and said he was curious if they wanted him to pour magical power into them. Suddenly, a stone began to crack. The boy shouted excitedly that he was sorry he had poured too much. It turned out that these were not stones, but eggs from which tiny ants and spiders began to crawl out. The spider and the ant loudly shouted that it was cool, and Akira, in shock, looked at the small creatures and also shouted loudly. Akira and his friends walked through the forest. The boy said sadly that he was wrong when he shouted, and awkwardly thought that he knew little about insects and did not think those were eggs. He concluded if it had been a centipede, he would probably have smashed them. Akira noticed a spider on the wolf's back and decided that it was normal they were just going for tea. Akira gently petted Koa and, smiling, said he was glad to have met him. The boy asked Chai if he wanted to be petted too, but the wolf turned away. Akira awkwardly admitted that he was rejected, and that guy asked Chai with interest. Maybe he is not loved because he spends a lot of time with Koa. Chai blushed and thought that he wanted to be scratched first. Koa asked the wolf if he was jealous of his master. Chai shouted loudly that it was not true. Koa thought it was so cute. Akira smiled and also thought that Tia was so cute. They were walking through the forest and suddenly stopped in front of a cave. Akira exclaimed in surprise that there were so many caves in this forest. They went inside, and the boy said thoughtfully, "I wonder if there will be something here this time." They moved deeper into the cave. Animals covered in black liquid ran out at them and fiercely attacked to force them to retreat from the man. Akira froze, looking at the beasts. At the same moment in the castle, dozens of soldiers and mages lined up before the king, and the advisor loudly announced that 25 mages would accompany the 2nd and 5th squads to subdue the monsters. Several people stood in a row, someone in armor, someone with a hood on their head. Gun Mules thought with admiration that it was because of the report published recently. Gamal spread his arms and smiled widely. Cole loudly said that until now he had spared the forest animals. He even honored them to serve his country. He continued to say that his mercy was the last rebellion, so he would burn the forest to the ground. The knights shouted joyfully. The boy asked to be entrusted with such a great role. The friends smiled and replied that his hands were already itching. Jen Milsey thought fiercely that he wanted to burn him. The mages really had great power, and the 5th squad was full of madmen who adored fighting monsters. The man continued to think that this time their enemy was something much scarier than the king of the forest. Akira and Koa fought monsters that had gone mad. Several monsters rushed forward, and the boy said that he was fine, he had set up a barrier in time. The boy said that they looked like Chai, maybe they were children. A spider sat on the wolf's back, and he himself was on alert ready to attack. Tia angrily exclaimed that they did not recognize him. He asked them to wake up. The fur on the wolf's back stood on end, they were ready to attack. The animals growled angrily at him. Chai ran up to Akira and shouted anxiously, begging the master to help them. Akira shouted for them to stop moving. The animals stopped as the boy commanded. He joyfully exclaimed that this was good. By creating the image of a cage, he succeeded. Light began to fall on the wolves, and the animals were very frightened by the surprise. Akira smiled and soothingly told Chai not to worry. The boy spoke words to begin the cleansing. The curse began to retreat from the wolves. He joyfully exclaimed that it worked. The animals began to cough and breathe heavily. Akira began to heal them with his power. The wolves, although remaining unconscious, were now in no danger, and the boy looked at them happily. Blood flowed from the wolf's mouth. The boy approached one of the wolves and laid his hands on him. He began to heal the wounded wolf. The wolves slowly began to regain consciousness, and Akira, noticing this, sincerely smiled and rejoiced at their recovery. Akira said that these children were friends of Chai. They were so thin. The boy angrily thought that he would not be able to forgive the one who cast this curse, and meanwhile the meeting continued in the castle. The king joyfully shouted to the knights that the kings of the forest must know the terror of the emperor, and the knights raised their hands and loudly echoed his call. The king raised his hands up and began to recite a spell. A huge pillar of light rose and headed into the sky. The dolls worked on the farm, and Akira thought that in a few days he would be asked to triple the size of the agricultural corps. He still thought that before he could recover, a small lake suddenly appeared near the field. Akira and the others approached the shore. Fluffy flew cheerfully over the water. Akira looked at the ants and said that they had dug it together. It was simply incredible. Fluffy began showing various tricks with the water, molding water balls and throwing them at Akira's feet. Fluffy started hitting the tree. Akira awkwardly asked what was going on. He wanted him to cut down the tree. He wanted to expand the lake. They walked a little more along the lake. The boy entered the hut and said tiredly that he had returned home. He had done everything he could. The spiders crawled up to him and looked at him anxiously. Akira inquired if something had happened at the food warehouse. The boy went down the stairs and looked into the storage, then said that even those shelves that were supposed to be empty were now completely filled. He noticed golems carrying food. Akira said that was understandable. Now they could use what they had gathered in the fields and make preparations for the winter. The boy added that they needed to expand the room. Akira cast magic and said that now they would keep the cold here. The dolls ran into the warehouse with boards. They instantly set up additional shelves. Akira screamed in shock that they had expanded them in the blink of an eye. The golems grabbed goods and rushed to fill the shelves with them. The boy took vegetables and, smiling, said that he could do it. The doll jumped and shook its head, showing that she should not do that. Akira and Kola went into the forest. The boy said in surprise, "What happened?" They had already reached the barrier, so it was 2 hours left to home. He wondered if he could expand it even more, it would be nice. Akira raised his eyes to the sky and saw a huge dragon. Koa growled angrily at it, and the wolf loudly shouted that it was very dangerous. Akira heard a noise, turned around, and saw in surprise. Nearby was a dragon, widely opening its jaws and roaring. Suddenly Karen appeared and shouted loudly that she managed to return earlier today. Inside the master's barrier, everything was strangely quiet and calm. The bird noticed the dragon and said it was a wyvern such are rarely encountered. Karen loudly called her master. The bird thought that tough inverted skin made him a dangerous opponent who could not be wounded by mass attacks. Akira understood with embarrassment that his training for an attack worked automatically, did not think it would turn out this way, so he asked with a smile if it was edible. Koa laughed with happiness. Akira waved to Karen and exclaimed, "Welcome home." Why was she standing there? Everyone returned home to eat something. Each wolf grabbed a piece of meat for himself. Koa met Chai and shouted for him to eat as well. The wolf awkwardly replied that he apologized and thanked him for the meat brought. Akira applied divine punishment. The boy irritably thought that he did not know what would happen and where this curse came from. At that time, the king was plotting something. The king tried to approach, but he was pushed back. He was in shock trying to understand what had just happened. It couldn't be but he was attacked. How foolishly all this happened. He sat down on the chair and said in surprise that he did not expect the king to be attacked. Mizros said with regret that it was a pity he was not there, but the barrier that protected the king pushed him away, didn't it? Hamels replied that it seemed as if lightning had struck right in front of the king. Mizros shouted that, as expected, the royal barrier was incredibly strong, and finally asked to send the army into the forest. Genmulsi agreed but turned to the mages, built numerous barriers, and locked himself in a stone room. Mizros asked in surprise why the invincible king was acting so timidly. Gunmulza said he knew. This country had never been attacked by anyone from anywhere, and the defensive barrier was still unbroken. Mizoros, stunned, asked him what he meant. Ganmuls replied that it meant the attack had gone beyond the barrier. The man looked anxiously at his friend. At this time, Akira was walking down the street near the house and humming a melody, and animals were walking beside him. Akira smiled and told Koa that he was glad they looked fine. Now they could also have dinner. He asked the golem to take care of it, but wasn't it too big? He went out to the clearing and saw a pile of meat. Akira exclaimed in surprise the golems did it so quickly. They grabbed the hide and dragged it away to get to work. Akira was roasting the meat on the fire, and his animals sat nearby, licking their lips and very eager to eat. Akira tasted his creation and exclaimed with delight that it tastes like white rice. He had dreamed so much about rice with thick eggs that he would gladly eat it. The boy grumbled that this lizard doesn't taste like chicken, he wants exactly fried chicken. If you think about it, you can wait for oil from the camellia seed, but is there even such a seed in this world? The wolves grabbed a piece of meat when a bird flew up to them. Karen shouted at the top of his voice that this meat was prepared for him by the master, and the wolves replied that their portions were too small. A flood of thoughts, tears in his eyes, and he realized that he had returned to reality. A little upset, the animals began to fight fiercely for the food. The next day morning came. Akira sat at the table and said that fried chicken wouldn't work for now, but fried vegetables are also very tasty. Akira tried and said sadly that it was completely different where to get oil here. He ate the seeds and shouted loudly how bitter they were. The spider and the ant brought him more food. Akira smiled and said he was grateful to them for bringing more. He cut the fruit and pulled out the seeds. Akira tasted these fruits and said the taste was familiar. The boy asked with interest where they got this fruit, so Akira and his friends were led to where these fruits grow. Kiro and his accompanying animals stopped and looked ahead in surprise. A belt hung on Akiro's chest. Berries hung on the bushes. Akira looked at the white wolf in surprise and thoughtfully raised his hand to his face. Gamels added that probably because of this, because the king said he would burn the forest. Akuro said he wanted to expand it threefold, no, about 5 times.